Hey guys, welcome back to Resistance Chicks, where we are in Arizona for the hearing before the some of the Republican state legislature. I have right here behind us. This is the outside of the hearing rally. We've got some speakers there, and this guy is kind of cursing, but he's very enthusiastic about what he's saying. I can't tell who it is, but prior to that, when I just turned it on, they were praying and stuff, and it was really, really encouraging to hear how powerful they were speaking. So I wanted to have that up and in the background. And if this guy had a cleaner mouth, I would be playing him. But I guess I could go ahead and we can give it a whirl.
Everybody in this party, because we are the party of the people. We are the party of America. God, it's to you who has given us strength to be here today. Please continue to give us the strength to fight. Please, Lord, rid the evil of this country. Get rid of the corruption that's happening in this country. Lord, you're the Almighty and the All-Knowing, and I know you see what's going on. And you're trying to teach us a lesson right now. There's a lesson you're trying to teach us, and we understand that. Lord, we have walked away from you. We have allowed people to push you out of this country. But Lord, as we come closer to you, please come closer to us. We know that it takes you to make this country great again. And we ask you, Lord, to be with us, to stand and fight against these evils, these people that are hurting our children, our elderly, stunning our millennials' development, and just really taken away from what America is. And Lord, the country you've given us, humble us, make us appreciate it, because we've gotten away from that. And Lord, teach us the lesson you want us to be taught. And Lord, we ask you to bestow the blessings you've given us before back on us, and allow us to be that big brother to everybody around the world, and to give and to be that role model, because we know you blessed us with that. Lord, we ask you to protect our freedom so we can continue to fight for you. We fight with you, Lord, and we stand with President Donald J. Trump. And Lord, we ask you, in this time, please keep President Donald J. Trump in the office for 4 more years. In God's name, we will always pray. Amen. 4 more years. 4 more years. 4 more years.
Turn it
Let
down
them
a
hear
little
you
bit.
inside. Come on. They need to hear us inside.
I turned that down on purpose because it was getting a little scratchy. I'm sharing this on Facebook. I'm going to share it on Parlor as well. And you guys can share it everywhere else. I'm just writing, I can't wait to hear more testimony.
So, guys, where we're at right now, I'll tell you, and I know a lot of people are frustrated. I got a call from my mom the other day. Poor thing, she calls me concerned. She's like, honey, did President Trump concede? Can I get a hell no? Hell no! Did President Trump concede? I said, no, Mom, where'd you hear that? She said, well, because we own some restaurants. She goes, no, some customers came in and they're like, President Trump conceded. No. Fake news media, they want to keep pushing it. Let me tell you why. They want to keep your morale down. They want you to feel like we're losing. I read something yesterday from D.C. Draino. I don't know if you guys follow him. Great patriot. He said Barack Obama gave up his Senate seat, resigned on November 16th, 2008. But Kamala Harris has yet to resign her Senate seat.
Exactly. That's so huge, guys.
You know why?
We all know why.
I don't wonder. Joe, we did it, Joe. We did it. No, you didn't.
No, you didn't.
No, you didn't. Hey, guys, here's the thing. As we stand here together, I want you to think of this. There's a lot of whistleblowers. There's a lot of patriots coming out. There's a lot of people that are putting their lives on the line. And unfortunately, and I hate to say this, I've heard way too many threats that are happening to people. And that's what that side is doing. That's what not just the Democrats, guys, the deep state. Because trust me when I tell you the deep state's relevant on both sides. Okay? When I had Cindy McCain say that what we're doing against child sex trafficking is wrong, and the Arizona Republic called me saying, hey, she said what you're doing is wrong, I said, why did it get bigger under her and her husband continuously? I asked Cindy McCain, I said, hey, Cindy, My question was asked as a Republican. He said, hey, do you think people higher up are involved in sex trafficking? I said, well, let me ask you something. If you and I don't pay our taxes, do they show up at our door? Hell yeah, they do. They want to know why. So my question, the guy said, if they do that, why aren't they showing up on the doorstep of a $150 billion industry? And you're telling me somebody higher up isn't involved? It's about time this corruption gets brought up. It's about time we stand for this. And this is their last attempt before their party falls. They know their values and their morals aren't working. And this is their last attempt to take this country because they didn't expect President Trump to win in 2016. They didn't expect him to win. But guess what? God won.
That's so good. That's so good. God won.
And I tell you,
let me fix this camera here.
I tell you, if you don't believe that God has his hand in this, then you're missing out. Because RGB passing away 45 days before the election.
Yeah.
So that we could put a beautiful Amy Coney Barrett in there. I don't know what to tell you. So Patriots, as we stand here and fight, I ask you one thing. Get on your social media.
Leah is out walking a dog in the snow. She will be back at some point.
Stand for
Never
your
fear.
country. Call out your brothers and sisters that said they have voted for President Trump and say you need to be here. I'm tired of seeing we're censored on social media or we're this or that. Get out here and make a change. Get out here and put pressure on the legislators. When you're on Instagram and on Facebook, tag as many people as possible. Don't just push it. Tag people.
All right. Now, here's what I want to do, guys. This is NTD, and it seemed like they may have had a little bit, they're on the other side of the room. So we need to decide whether we want NTD's footage or right side broadcasting. What do you think? There's that one or that one. I was kind of covering it up. So let me know which one you like better. I kind of like the other angle better, even though this picture's a little bit more clear. And I know it's not as good as it was when I had it taking up the whole screen, but this is the best. You want to do right side? All right, we'll do right side. Let me mute these guys. And if we have to, we can switch back over too. Let me mute that. Come on. I want to mute you. All right. All right, we're going to unmute right side. And we're going to make them big. There we go. Whichever one's more conservative. I don't think it really matters as far as the conservative. NTD is pretty good. So anyway, sorry, it's difficult for me when I'm looking at everything from the technical standpoint, and I want it to look as good as possible so you guys get as clear of a picture and quality stream as possible, instead of giving you actual commentary while we wait for everybody to fill the room. But if you missed it, the first 3 hours of this were so detailed, and you may see the mainstream media say, oh, it was boring, or no evidence came out and it's not worth your watch, they just drug on for, oh my gosh, those would be complete and blatant lies. It's been amazing.
Get on their way. Mr. Brainerd is the next one on the list.
Mr. Brainerd, yes.
If you're not, you are now.
Yeah. You're going to be at that table, sir, right there. Yep. Looks like you're going to have a minute to get set up. Is that maybe not so? So?
I think so.
All right. And I presume you want to have what you have to show us on the screen as well? All right. Our AV guys will take care of that.
Dale Jones says I donated to his investigation.
While you're doing that, Mr. Brainerd, will you be able to accomplish what you've got to say in 30 minutes?
Hopefully
That would
less.
be a blessing. Thank you very much. And as soon as we got you on the screen, while we're waiting down that,
Although
would you
his
please
30
give your
minutes
name
probably is supposed to
and,
include his questions, and
your
these
credentials, and just
people get long-winded.
10 seconds on what you expect to show.
Sure. My name is Matt Brainerd. I'm the leader of the Voter Integrity Project, looking into anomalies and potential illegal ballots cast in this election in the 6 pivotal states, including Arizona. I have a background working in voter data going back over 20 years with the Republican National Committee, with President Trump's campaign, with election administration and redistricting firm Election Data Services. So this is an area where I have a lot of experience and expertise. So, are you ready for me to start?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Proceed. Thank
So,
you.
A couple days after the election, I and a team of dedicated individuals with experience similar to my own in the field of voter data and analysis decided to engage in an experiment of sorts to detect potentially illegal ballots without any preconceived notions about what we might find, what we want to find, just to try to determine the truth using a couple of different analytical methods. Fortunately, despite the great expense of this experiment, we were able to fundraise through crowdsourcing in a very short order. We've raised over $600,000 from almost 9,000 different donors all over the country who are interested in finding the truth. And we entered this with although many of us have political biases, personally, we brought none of those biases to our analysis. We just decided we wanted to try to find the truth using methods we believe to be reliable. Our findings were across the country. We found a tremendous number of anomalies, and Arizona is at the forefront of many of the anomalies we found. Now, unlike many other states that we evaluated, there were some unique limitations to our analysis in Arizona. In general, we were only able to get data for early and absentee voters in all of the 6 states we targeted. In Arizona, we were only able to get early and absentee voters for the county of Maricopa. So all the numbers I'm sharing with you, all the analysis is based solely on Maricopa. Now, as the other counties make their data available, we'll certainly try to update these reports and these numbers. But just looking at Maricopa, we found some interesting results. So I'm going to open up a PowerPoint that kind of covers the country, but I'm really just going to speak about Arizona, which is, I know what you're interested in. So.
They really should dim the lights in the room when they're doing these PowerPoint presentations.
Okay. So we ran 5 or 6 different experiments on each of these states. One experiment that we ran where we isolated a universe of voters according to the state who had been sent an absentee ballot but did not return that ballot. And we asked them 2 questions. One, we asked them, by reaching out to them via phone, because we were operating 3 different call centers to try to reach these people to confirm whether or not they had ever requested that absentee ballot and whether or not they returned it. So in Arizona, we were able to reach 2,044 people who had been identified as having requested an absentee ballot and not returned it, according to the state. Of them said they never requested that ballot. Then, among the individuals who did say they did request it, we asked, well, did you send it back? And among those, of the overall universe, we had 354 of them say, yeah, I actually mailed it back, despite the state not recording having received it back. Now, I've got a little bit of audio-visual for you because our call centers were recording phone calls. Now, none of this is speculative. I know that some people have, other analysts in some of the court cases I've been involved in have taken our numbers and then projected them. Say, for example, projecting that 44% of the did not request of our sample out to the entire universe of about 500,000 unreturned, and saying these are the number of ballots that it seems or appears possible that somebody else requested those ballots other than the voter of record. But I'm not doing that myself. Others are welcome to make that analysis. I don't have a background as a statistician. But what I do have is I'd like to share with you some of the audio recordings of at least 2 of the individuals we spoke to who said that they did not get a ballot, they did not request the ballot despite being sent them. Now these audio recordings have been modified to cut out like their last names because we don't want to inadvertently dox anybody here. But if somebody privately, as you're in positions of authority in the legislature, wants full recordings, we're more than happy to share that with you. More than happy to give you the names, addresses, phone numbers of everybody we've identified in these categories. Okay? So I'm going to play the one audio recording of an individual. Bear with me as I make some adjustments.
We recognize that technology is great until you actually need to have it work.
Yeah, but we can find a workaround if we need to. So I'm just going to hold the mic to the computer speaker.
Can't hear it.
Can we get it on this speaker? Okay, we'll try it again. Okay.
You have to be patient. This is exactly what I deal with here at Resistance Chicks all the time. All the time. But thanks to the new mic.
Hello, this is Mary Kemper with Voter Integrity Fund. May I please speak to Charles?
This is, who are you with?
Voter Integrity Fund. Charles works in the state of Arizona and is having requested an absentee ballot. Did you request an absentee ballot?
Absolutely did not.
No, I did not.
Okay, and did you? Okay, no. Okay, somebody from our team will follow up with you, and can you please give us the best phone number? Is it this?
So I'll play for you the second example.
Hello? Hello?
Hi.
Hi, is this Zofa?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Taj. I'm with the Voter Integrity Fund. In the state of Arizona, it said that you requested the absentee ballot. I'm just making sure that you requested that ballot.
No, I did not request an absentee ballot.
Okay, somebody from our team will follow up with you. Is this a good number to follow back up with you on?
Yes.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time, and you have a good day.
So he's giving
Excuse
an
me, Matt,
example.
before you go too much further, can you tell me what counties were those calls made to? Were they
The
all
only county that's
Maricopa?
released data for us is Maricopa.
All right,
so-
thank you.
Sure. I'm going to proceed. So we, with some of the other experiments we ran, one of them was, again, no one's ever kind of tried to do this after an election before. Nobody's had the interest or the funds to
They
do so.
should.
So like to really think about, if people were trying to cast illegal ballots, either it was part of an organized voter fraud effort or just somebody just deciding I'm going to cast a ballot I shouldn't, maybe a ballot that's not for my name, just one individual deciding, I got an absentee ballot request to this address, my address, this person doesn't live in here anymore, but maybe I should fill it out and see if I can cast it, or, potential clerical errors. No one's ever really done this before, so we tried some stuff that just kind of that made us curious, things that we thought we might find things. So in Arizona, we actually pulled a universe of people who had never voted before, except they've showed up and voted this election. And just call them and say, hey, did you actually cast that ballot? It's very hard. Any of you who've, I'm sure in your maybe races for office, have operated phone centers or conducted public polling, when you start out with a universe that's pretty big, once you start trying to dial that and get responses, that universe shrinks a lot and shrinks very quickly because you have a broad universe and you have to try to pen phone numbers to it and you get maybe half of them or so, and the people who the numbers are correct or they don't go to voicemail, or some other problem, and people who actually pick up the phone and then start answering questions, that universe shrinks a lot. So we did this experiment in Arizona with some, again, voters who had never voted before, again, and asked them if they had cast that ballot. Now, about 1% of them told us that they didn't. But remember, those are people willing to talk to us and admit that they did not cast a ballot. And many of the people we reached, we had to leave voice messages for. We just couldn't get a hold of. But one person in particular, I want to play a video for you guys, who we left him a voicemail, but he never talked to us, so he's not included in these numbers. So I want to share just a clip, if I can, from a program. Let me adjust the volume here.
Maricopa County, Arizona to Tennessee about 5 months ago so he could train for the Olympics. So you can imagine his surprise when he got a message from something called the Voter Integrity Fund.
The state of Arizona is reporting that a ballot was cast in the name of Nishan Garrett in the general election on Tuesday. If Nishan Garrett did not cast this ballot, please call us back.
Well, that doesn't sound fishy at all, right? Well, Nishan didn't think so either. So he went to the state of Arizona's voting website only to discover that his ballot had been accepted. And Maricopa County's voter portal said his ballot was signature verified and counted. The only problem is he'd already voted in Tennessee. He didn't vote in Arizona. Nishan Garrett joins me now. Nishan, great to see you. Now, you never received an Arizona absentee ballot or an application for mail-in ballot, so who the heck cast your ballot in Arizona?
That is an excellent question. That is an excellent question. I have no idea, and that's the reason why I'm on here with you tonight.
Wow.
So I'm going to stop the video
about
there.
that. It's so huge.
But I think you get the drift of that. I'm actually going to play for you another recording here, which actually this one was particularly interesting to me.
Hi, my name is Thomas with the Voter Integrity Fund. May I please speak with Riley?
Yep, speaking to him.
All right, hi. Can you confirm whether or not you cast a ballot in the state of Arizona?
I'm a felon, so I can't vote.
All right. Let's see here. According to the state of Arizona, somebody cast a ballot in your name and you may be a victim of voter fraud. Can you please give us the best number to reach you?
I mean, probably the one you're calling me at.
So I cut the video because, whenever we reach somebody like this, we wanted to ask them a couple questions. Is the best number to reach you at? Would you be willing to sign a declaration or something like that so we could pass that off to attorneys? I think those are two, and we've got hundreds of them of different categories. So we'll, as you've heard, we have recordings of everyone we spoke to, of the 900 or so that didn't request, of the 354 that said they did request but mailed it back, and somehow the state never got their vote. I want to talk about one of the other experiments we ran. We, at great expense, obtained a national voter file, and we used it to determine people who may have been registered here, moved to another state, registered to vote there, I believe invalidating their residency or inability to vote here, and then cast a ballot back here because we all have anecdotes, right? We've all heard crazy stories. I've had people, since this project has started, emailing me stories about the sister-in-law or brother-in-law they don't like, they suspect they may have cast 2 ballots. They want me to look into it, and giving me their full addresses and dates of birth. Or I've also received, though, screenshots of social media profiles saying this person, they live in New York City. They've lived here a long time, but they figured their vote wouldn't really matter in New York City, but it would matter back in Arizona. So there's anecdotes, right? I don't think it's ever possible to maybe get enough of those anecdotes to have a meaningful number. But what we did is we took our national voter file and looked at registration dates there. And then we looked at the registration dates of people we matched it to in Arizona, where they moved from Arizona to California, for example, registered to vote there, and then decided they shopped their ballot, potentially, or they had the ballot cast in their name, and decided, you know what, my vote might count more in Arizona than it does in California, swing state. So we were able to identify these individuals who had a subsequent registration out of state, but cast their early absentee here. Again, just Maricopa County and just early absentee, no election day. We also did an NCOA analysis. And when people move from one state to another, the Postal Service sort of tracks that. Often people fill out an NCOA card saying, I've moved here, please forward my mail. It's a pretty good indicator they've established residency somewhere else. And we found among this population a substantial number who NCOA'd to another state, but cast their ballot here. Now,
you guys can't see that NCOA number is at the top.
Earned the reputation lately is kind of a data guy, but
says
I work as a general
5,084.
consultant. I do all kinds of work around the country for candidates, everything from speeches to fundraising to designing literature. I've knocked on over 1,000 doors myself this cycle in states all over the country, and I can tell you that a lot of times you know people are they move and they're very careful about where they can vote, where they can make potentially cast a vote, where they think if they have options they make a choice, and sometimes they don't always make the right choice. So just in my experience of that, you know, it's not that uncommon. So people move, but they can still vote here. They get an absentee request forwarded to them and they cast the ballot. They should. When we combine those numbers together for your state and we merge and we take out some that we estimate to have been military moves, which they don't actually lose their ability to vote in the state, we came up with a total of about 5,700 or so, just Maricopa, just early absentees. We also identified a population of double voters. Now, what's unique about this is that, again, we're not looking at people who maybe voted in person in California and voted by mail here. We're only able, because of limited data in many states, to compare early absentee voters to early absentee voters in other states. So if they voted early absentee in Arizona and voted early absentee, for example, in California, they'd show up here. But if and when we get access to election day voter lists, we'll be able to, these numbers will inevitably go up. And also, we've got a lot of limitations on our ability to match. One of those limitations is the availability of full and accurate dates of birth from states on their voter lists. In a lot of cases, states will suppress that. And that prevents us from being able to get a successful match on somebody who moved out of state with a subsequent registration. Because for us, for our project, we can't be the voter integrity project without integrity, and that requires a very tight match. So we're sure it's not just somebody with the same name, or even somebody with the same name, born in the same year, but it's got to be day, month, year exact as best we can. And we actually try to match on cell phones too when we're able to do that. So that kind of concludes the initial findings that I wanted to share with you about your state in particular. And I'd be happy to take any questions if you have them.
Mr. Mayor, do you want to ask this gentleman some questions?
Go ahead.
No? All right. Matt, I really appreciate you coming in. I know that you flew in, I think, late last night to make a short and succinct presentation. Can you tell me, relative to the work that you've done, with certainty, how many votes were cast that should not have been? Just a high-level number, because obviously, for example, the Trump campaign would like to see 10,457 votes overturned. But, not to be exact, but are we there based on the work that you've done? Because as we look at your work and the work of other people, we're starting to chip away at that number in a pretty serious way.
I would say there's 2 levels of confidence I have, okay? The first level of confidence is very. And I am very confident that we get very close to that number when we take the residency issues and then apply it to the other counties for which we weren't able to obtain data.
Thank you.
The second level of confidence is where you take a number of projection, you go back out to low activity analysis and NCO analysis, which I'm not going to get in the weeds, but these are basically people telling us that they had votes, that they didn't cast votes, they were cast their name. If you're comfortable projecting these numbers to the population that we were trying to reach via phone that we just couldn't, I think then you reach another level of certainty that you're able to bridge that gap. So I think that I have a high degree of confidence that the number of ballots that were cast that should not have been cast, illegal ballots, surpasses the margin of victory as it stands right now.
Thank you very much. Representative Biasucci, you're the first to ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Second, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt, very much for your presentation. I just had a couple questions. For the 44% that you said did not request an early ballot but got one, how many people did you poll to get that 44%?
Well, we started off, as you can see in the chart, or maybe you can't see, with a large number of unreturned ballots in your state in Maricopa. And then we reached out, we were able to get a phone match to maybe 250,000 of those. The number we were able to reach via phone is 2,044. The number who said they did not request that ballot was 902. Now, when your colleague asked me the question about...
That's almost half. That's like 2/3.
How many, what's the margin of illegally cast ballots? I don't apply any of this, but this does raise a lot of questions. And that should a ballot be counted if somebody themselves did not actually request it?
Right. That's a very good, and that's why I'm asking that question, absolutely. And then the 1%, was it the same?
That
amount?
Was this is among our shot in the dark, calling people on the phone to ask them, did you actually cast the ballot? Because their voting history suggested that they hadn't voted very often, if at all. So that's this universe that we decide to reach out to, and we pulled a data load in the state of in case of your state of about 35,000.
The 1% of 35,000.
Right, but that universe could potentially be much larger. I just wanted to give our phone center an amount to sort of chew on. And the numbers, again, we saw the video of Mr. Garrett. We never spoke to him. He doesn't show up in these numbers. He just got the voice message. And I got to tell you the tremendous amount of courage for someone to do what he did, because when you become public, come forward in a situation like this, willing to say that you may have been a victim of voter fraud, you're all in the public spotlight, right? You're used to this. But if you're just some guy who seems to be the victim of voter fraud, all the things that have to go through your mind are, you're going to have a target on your back. You're going to have potential media trying to trash you, dox you.
Sure.
Or you have to talk to your wife about it first. What impact can it have on your occupation, on your family? So the willingness of him to actually go on television, I think there's got to be so many more people that just, not that they didn't have his courage, but just their life conditions would not allow them to come forward as publicly as he did.
Yeah, and I think, I don't care if it's one voter that this happened to. I mean, it's illegal. Right, and this is the problem, and the fact that even 1% of your 35,000, that should scare everybody. That's even happening. So
it's insane.
I appreciate you getting the data. Thank you,
Senator Borelli. Representative Bartow, any questions?
Just real quickly, I was wondering, you mentioned Arizona has more anomalies than other states. Were we the only ones that had this kind of anomaly compared to other states with the unrequested absentees?
That actually was a universal problem to all 6 states, to some degree, but I don't think any had it quite to the same degree as you did. I'll just consult my chart, but that was my recollection. Yeah, it was far more substantial in Arizona. And looking at all these different states, they actually all have their own unique things that kind of make them stand out a little bit. And this is something that was unique to Arizona that made it sick. Because, in other states, they had serious problems in areas where you didn't have problems. But this was a problem that seemed to be more prominent here than we found it elsewhere.
Would you think that's a feature of, absentee balloting is very popular here in our state? I mean, we've had it for years and it's growing, and voter confidence in the system had been growing until really there was more information about the vulnerabilities that have been coming to light and the questions about that. Do we compare? How do we compare with those other states?
Well, I think you have a stronger history of absentee ballot voting here than the other states do. But I think what's important is that, I've got a phone center, I've got data analysts, I can request things from different commercial vendors in your posse and go around and find out, well, who requested this ballot if this person didn't? How did that happen? It was done electronically, I can't track the IP addresses, I can't find the envelopes and that arrived in and dust it for fingerprint. That's something that's got to either be up to you guys or the law enforcement of your state or some other law enforcement agency. But getting the question in terms of who cast Nashawn Garrett's ballot, how did that happen? Was it clerical error, maybe, or signature verified? It wasn't just a cast; it was signature verified. Something went wrong here, and I don't have the power to find that out. I can just present it to you guys and to others who have similar authority. But I'd really like to know the answer to that question. I don't think I'm alone.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mayor Giuliani, you had a couple questions?
Yes, I do, sir. Just a few things that maybe I don't quite understand, but might be very helpful. The governor and the Secretary of State, I believe here today, certified the vote. It would seem to me that the one thing that you can be sure of, whether there are enough votes to overturn the election or not, or that the vote count is inaccurate, the one that presently exists. Is that right?
I believe that unless the questions that I raise get answered, you can't be confident of what the vote count actually is, and no one can.
But the present one is very questionable.
It is extremely questionable.
Not subject to a declaration under perjury that it's true and correct. Would you sign a declaration that it was true and correct in a statement to the federal government?
I absolutely would not. I would probably go, I would put myself at risk of going to prison.
And if I were your lawyer, I would tell you not to do it. Could you, based on your expertise, if in fact they hadn't been so hasty, or the legislature were to take the responsibility, could you conduct an audit in which you could come to a reasonable degree of certainty on how many illegal aliens voted?
It's good you asked that question. The federal government actually makes available a database of people, not necessarily who are citizens, but the opposite. People who are illegal aliens or green card holders, etc. And I actually have the document that a state would use to request that, to have that check done. And it's my intent, subsequent to this, because we've got other things flying around, but to pressure every state in the country to make this request of the federal government. And that request has to come from the Secretary of State's office. Now, what I don't know is, has the Secretary of State of this state ever made that request to bounce their voter list up against that to see who maybe is not qualified to cast a ballot? But that's an excellent question. That's what I think they should do.
Want to make a bet?
I'm not a gambling man.
Betting outside of the casinos here is illegal, sir.
Let's go across to Nevada, and we can do that. But seriously, with the number of illegal aliens in Arizona, in the millions, it's almost beyond doubt that some voted. And the margin is so small, 10 million. Wouldn't you be duty-bound to conduct that study before you certified a winner in this election?
I would agree, and it's so many things we can talk about that we shouldn't be happening at this hour. This is the kind of thing that the state should have done before Election Day, before a single ballot was cast. So remove the risk of contamination, and what's just as dangerous, I think, is the suspicion of contamination.
Right. Well, there's one study that was done that said 236,000 illegal aliens voted. I have no idea what their methodology was or how they produced it, but if you had time to do it, could that be done with a degree of certainty with regard to the number, even if it were an estimate?
Well, to figure out the precise number is difficult, but to hold your voter list against what this federal government will provide and match, you'd be able to subtract a substantial number of the illegal immigrants, or not just illegal immigrants casting ballots, but I think probably as prominent, which may increase your numbers, are people who are green card holders.
Yeah, non-citizens.
Other visas where they are here legally, but...
it's a bigger universe, non-citizens.
It's non-citizens who are permitted to vote. Yeah, it's a much bigger universe, and I could certainly do that analysis, but I could not do it without the signature of the Secretary of State on that letter to the federal government requesting access to that database, because as you know, as many of these people know, it's very hard to figure out who actually is a citizen and who is not, or who's entitled to vote and who is not.
And how about the number of felons who voted that were not entitled to vote? That's been estimated at over 200,000 also. Would an audit of the voting list be able to assist in determining An approximate number?
The mechanics, the technical mechanics of an audit are easy. Getting the data of all the felons who would be ineligible, and not just complete data, not just that data, but you need to have full names, dates of birth at least, and then have the reciprocal data from the state, which they should have, and if they don't, that's a huge problem, because we've encountered many cases where the state on their voter list, they've got like a blank, or they'll mark somebody as the default, like born on January 1st, the year 1900 or something. So to be able to conduct that analysis is easy, but to get the resources of the data behind it to conduct it may be challenging, but the state has a better capability of doing it than anyone else, and if you want to retain me to do that, I'd be happy to send you an invoice.
And how about people from out of the state voting?
That's an analysis we did run, but again, our numbers on extremely low side because we need to have a high degree of confidence. The state itself could probably do a much better job of doing that analysis, and other states would be able to find more people who we couldn't discover having moved to other states based on real estate records, claiming the homestead tax exemption, which I think also established residency in another state, and just being able to do a much more vigorous match on voter lists, because again, we only got what the state gave us. We don't have what the state itself has.
There was a poll that was published that said that non-citizens broke 80-20 for Biden. How would someone do a poll like that?
You know, I would have to see what the sample size is.
At least they made an attempt to find out who are the non-citizens. It seems like the governor and the Secretary of State just don't want the facts.
I've actually worked for many pollsters. I actually used to work for Frank Luntz, and I think figuring out how to do a poll of non-citizens in an election they shouldn't be able to vote in that's got a very high degree of difficulty. But Biden's doing really well with that group. I don't know why.
But that sounds like a pretty sensible breakdown.
Yeah.
So, just to sum up, in addition to all the hundreds of thousands of ballots where Republicans were not allowed to observe while the Democrats dealt with them secretly, there are also the clear fact that non-citizens voted. The question is how many. There's the clear fact that felons not entitled to vote voted. We just don't know how many. And that people from outside of Arizona voted. We just don't know how many. And in each case, the governor and the Secretary of State put their names on the certification that the results were true and accurate, and never bothered to make a single effort to find out about these obvious areas that would change the numbers.
In a municipal election this same year, I was working for the candidate, and one of my responsibilities was as poll watcher. And when it came time to open up the absentee ballots, I was sitting in the room, and I made sure I could hear and see everything. And in one case, a name came up, and I had my list, and I raised my hand. I said, I object. That person doesn't live here, doesn't live in this city, shouldn't be able to vote here. They took his ballot out, they examined it, we had a conversation about whether he should or not, and they actually, that vote was invalidated. It was spoiled.
You must have been in a state that follows the law.
I was, in fact, but if you do not have the ability to do that, it undermines the credibility of any election result.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bernard. I appreciate it.
Members on the panel, any other questions for Mr. Bernard? Representative Cook?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask you about the votes that you were talking about, that you could go in and you could find that stuff out, and I think we heard some misinformation. It wasn't 10 million, it's only 10,000 and some. And keep in mind, we don't need to find 10,000 votes, and I'm not saying we're for one person or versus the other, but 5,500 votes would change an election. So when you look at the numbers that you have presented just right here, right, and you call in question of, I won by 10,000 votes, let's say, well, 5,500 votes would change the election. And so it's very alarming when I see your information up here and the voicemails that you've had, but thank you for your work.
Thank you,
to that
sir.
point.
Representative Townsend?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to that point, there wasn't just one election here in Arizona. There was many. and we lost one seat in the Senate by a very slim margin. So I think it's important to remember that we're not just looking at this for one person's election, and Arizonans have a right to have representation on a clean, fair election. And your information is quite shocking. That would have changed the outcome of several elections here in the state. So I think an audit is warranted.
Thank you. Ms. Brainerd, I've been trying to refrain from commenting, but I'm going to tell you that you have just shown a light on something that confirms, I think, for all of us that this is not an illusory issue.
Yeah.
We have seen, this is hard. You know, somebody asked, where's the smoking gun? And I want to see the blood splatter. There it is. All right. So thank you very much, sir. I appreciate your testimony.
They don't even have questions for this dude. It just is what it is.
So our next witness is Dr. Shiva, and we're going to see what we can do to bring this in by way of Zoom. And I'm going to turn over the screen to Dr. Shiva. Oops, no.
If you guys don't know Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, dude.
And I think you need to unmute yourself, Dr. Shiva.
Yes, I'm unmuted. What I do need is I need the ability to share.
The ability to share. You are getting way above my ability to run Zoom. Let's see, oh, wait a minute.
Is there anybody here?
Multiple participants can share simultaneously. That's probably it. How about now?
Great.
All right.
Please proceed, sir.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. One of my expertise is in the field called pattern recognition and mathematical analysis, so I'll try to keep it brief. But the objectives of this study were pretty focused to essentially perform an initial analysis on Maricopa County and to identify any anomalies and to provide an explanation for those anomalies. So
get ready.
That's what this today's discussion is focused on.
Hold on to your butts.
At a very high level, many people probably know these numbers. If you look at the
I wish you guys could see that. I'm gonna make myself dark. I want you to see this. Hang on.
Vote in Maricopa County. In this election, 80.5% of them cast ballots, as you can see there. And this is not showing the data for, let's say, the independent or green parties, but 49.8% went to Biden and 47.6% to President Trump. So that was the reported results from the Secretary of State. The other important thing to note is that just to get it, one of the important features that you can look at in a election is a distribution of votes by party affiliation. So in this case, there was 35.3% of Republicans who voted, 31.3% of Democrats, 32.3% of independents, a small percentage of libertarians. That gives a total distribution. We'll come back to this, why this is important in this analysis. So what I want to first begin by having people put their attention on this chart. What this is we're literally taking all the data provided by the Secretary of State across the 743 precincts in Maricopa County, and we're literally recreating the election. And there are two curves here. One is the curve for President Trump, which is a red curve, and the blue curve is a curve for Mr. Biden. And as we move from left to right, what we're doing is we're starting with precincts which have low number of votes to precincts which have high number of votes. And we're literally counting the vote totals and summing them up together. When you get to the end here, you get the actual election results. So 49% for Mr. Biden and 47.6% for Mr. Trump. So these curves in many ways show the dynamic of the election as you move from the precincts from low vote counts to high, and you're essentially adding them up. So when you look at this curve in pattern recognition and pattern analysis, one of the things you try to understand is anomalies and the normal condition. So this is what we're calling the normal condition. In science, we'd call it the control. And we're literally looking at two important features. There's a shape of this curve, and there's the sequence and how this curve's developed. So in the analysis here, what we wanted to do was we wanted to see if we can reproduce the curve for President Trump and the curve for Mr. Biden by looking at the demographic of voters based on party affiliation, because that's one of the most easily accessible, or one of the most prominent features in an election. So towards this, we initially did a initial analysis of looking at voter turnout in a precinct, percent voter turnout. So every dot here represents a particular precinct, and you're looking at the percent voter turnout in a precinct along the y-axis, and along the x-axis simply the percent registered Republicans in a precinct. And what's interesting is you see a positive correlation. The more percentage of Republicans in a precinct, in fact, voter turnout is going up. Alternatively, when we looked at the percentage voter turnout in a precinct by percent registered Democrats in a precinct, you see a negative relationship. As the percentage of Democrats in a precinct increases, each blue dot is a precinct, you see a negative correlation with voter turnout. And similarly, we see the same behavior in the registered independents in a precinct. Voter turnout, and you see the negative correlation. So in summary, for Republicans, where the percent turnout positively correlates with percentage registered Republicans in a precincts, for Democrats and independents, the percent turnout negatively correlates with percent registered Democrats and percent registered independents in precincts. So that's just giving you the feature of what was taking place in Maricopa County. Now, getting back to this, we have the capability, the computer affords us the opportunity to do what we call scenario testing. What are the potential scenarios of distribution of Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Libertarians, and Greens, that if you were to look at the potential infinite possibility spaces, we haven't done all of them, but in the time that we have, what are the percentages of distributions of voters that would give rise to produce President Trump's curve here? And what are the percentages that would give rise of those allocations of Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Greens, and Libertarians to give rise to Mr. Biden's percentage? And the reason we want to do this is to look at the plausibility of these results. Is it plausible that you could have some reasonable distribution of Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Green to generate this very particular slope and these curves to get this net result? And remember, again, we're going from precincts from left to right, we're accumulating votes. So this is really 743 different data points. So what we first did, just to give you an idea, this is one of the potential scenarios where we're looking at, in the case of Democrats, we're looking at a split of votes between Mr. Biden and Trump of 20% to 80%, of Republicans between 80% to 20%, and of the Independents 70-30, Libertarians 0-100, and Green 100 zeros. This is one of the computer simulations. Like this, a computer can do far better than I could do sitting here. And what you see is the green line is trying to match Mr. Biden's blue line, and you can see it's way off. And the purple line is trying to match the red line. So obviously these aren't matching, because again, we wanted to see if we can overlay on those. So here's another potential scenario. In this case, we're looking at Biden.
I have no idea what just happened.
Voter distribution of Democrats by 80-20, Republican 20-80, the Independents 30-60, Libertarians 10-90, 100-0. And in this case, the blue line here, the purple line here, is at least nearer the red line, and the green line is getting closer to Mr. Biden. So again, the green and the purple are the simulated versions. Then we do another example. Well, this is getting a little bit closer. We see 100% Democrat, 0% Trump for Democrat distribution relative to Republicans, 20-80 split, 36%, 58% on the Independents, and so on. But it's still not matching, even though it's getting close here. You notice the slopes aren't matching. Well, we try a different case, 100% Democrat, 0% Biden, Trump, Republican 0-100, and so on. Still doesn't match. this iteration process, again, the computer was done, and the only one that we were able to come close to matching was this. And I want everyone to look at this carefully.
Look at,
so
y'all can't see
all
this.
the potential universe, which we've done, and we're going to continue doing this. By no means is this done.
That says
We
130.
find that the interesting possibility we find here is when the Democrat percentage is 130%,
No.
Mr. Biden, and negative 30%, Mr. Trump.
You can't have a
And the
negative.
Republican percentage is 0, 100. The Independent is 30%, 58%. Libertarian 0, 60, 60, 0. But what's extraordinary about this graph, again, you know, we went through many, many, many iterations. It matches perfectly, near perfectly. The slopes match, the curves match, the shape match. So what this tells us is that this demographic distribution of
I'm gonna cry.
allocation of party affiliations is what can generate this. And I find it highly implausible because this means that Mr. Biden got 130% of Democrat voters and negative 30%, and President Trump got negative 30%. So how is this possible? How is this quote unquote result possible? Well, one possibility.
Oh my gosh, you know why it's cutting out?
Could be there's a demographic within the independent voters, which is this group here, okay, this 58% not visible in our model who voted for Biden. Again, we would need to get more access to data, which is, by the way, very difficult to get access to. Another possibility is that Mr. Biden's actual votes were multiplied by 1.3, which is 130%, meaning each single vote Mr. Biden received, single vote he actually received became 1.3 reported votes. Sort of, there was an increase in a weighting of a vote that was given to Mr. Biden, and President Trump's votes are reduced by that 0.3 or 30% gained by Mr. Biden. Simply put, you could call this vote swapping.
Vote swapping.
Or there could be a combination of both. So that's what we have discovered today. But this combination, out of all the possibilities to match this curve perfectly, is the only one we found so far. And the demographic distribution that it asserts seems highly implausible. But again, we need to do more research. One is, again, as I mentioned, that there could be certain groups of independent voters that are not visible in the model, or it could be vote swapping, or all three. And I'll end on that note.
Oh my gosh.
All right, Dr. Shiva. I'm looking at Mr. Giuliani, and I see he's been scratching some things out here. I'm pretty sure you have a question or two.
I do, sir.
Please, sir.
Doctor, it's Rudy Giuliani. How are you?
How are you, Mayor Giuliani?
Can I just ask you, how did you get to that calculation where Trump received minus 30% of the Democrat vote? Can you explain to us in a way that we can understand how you got to that calculation?
Sure. So let me go back to it, if I can go back to it. So think of this, Mayor Giuliani, as if you think about this, this is a curve that represents the actual vote, what's called the cumulative vote count for Mr. Biden and President Trump. Okay, so this is the control. This is what actually occurred on election night. Does that make sense? And what we're attempting to do in mathematics, using mathematics, you can do what's called curve fitting, where you can change certain variables to attempt to fit this curve. The variables we are changing here, which cannot be done, manually, but the computer is essentially changing the possibilities of different levers, the percentage of Democrats who voted for President Trump, the percent of Democrats who voted for Mr. Biden, the percent of Republicans who voted for Biden, the percent of Republicans who voted for Trump, the percent of independents who voted for Biden, the percent of independents who voted for Trump, and so on. So it's a solving where, remember in algebra where you could multiply variables by different equations, and you're trying to match this curve. So the computer is doing this, Mayor Giuliani, and so that's why I'm showing you this different possibilities. Now there's hundreds of thousands that the computer is running through to figure out what possible, as you can see here, what possible
look at this, and that's why they say there's no evidence
would lead to this. And the only one we were able to find was this. I hope that explains it. We're looking at the computer trying to find combinations of these vote allocations that could perfectly reproduce this result.
So a vote for Biden would actually be 1 1/3 vote. Is that correct?
Yeah, 1 3/10, right. So
1 3/10.
So Biden got one vote.
1 3/10, and a vote for Trump would be 1.
A vote for Trump would be whatever the president got, if he got 100 votes, reduced by 30% of what Mr. Biden got. Basically, the president's vote is linked to the vote that Mr. Biden got. So if Biden got 100 votes and his went up by 1.3, which means it took 30% of the votes were reduced, that would go to President Trump. So basically, votes are being eaten from President Trump and handed over to Mr. Biden. That's the only way to, one possibility of explaining.
They're holding these hearings because judges won't look at the evidence.
At all with Colonel Waldron?
I received a text message from this earlier, and in preparation for this, I wasn't able to get to him, but I'm willing to discuss that with him.
Well, he reached a very similar conclusion in a different way, that the votes for Biden were valued within the computer algorithm as higher than the votes for Trump. Could you accomplish that within a computer that you had gotten control of?
Well, one of the important things to recognize is that what we do know is, starting in 2002, Mayor Giuliani, that these voting vendors, it was brought out in one of the Diebold manuals, have a feature called the weighted race feature. The weighted race feature, it's a documented feature. And the weighted race feature basically says that the feature in the software, which the secretaries of state have certified, knowingly or maybe unconsciously, but they must have certified these electronic voting system software, has a feature called the weighted race feature, which allows a voter's vote to be, or a candidate's votes to be multiplied. So what that means is the central principle that Justice Earl Warren ruled on in 1964, one person, one vote, or clarified that, can be violated. It can be one person, not one vote. And that is one explanation of this. But the important feature I think people in the public need to understand is these software systems, the electronic voting software systems, have a documented feature called a weighted race feature. So the implementation of this is very possible. In fact, it's a documented feature starting as early as 2002.
Is there any reason for that? Any legitimate reason? Don't you want to count every vote as one?
Every vote should be counted as one vote, but the fact that a weighted race feature exists should be a serious concern to all of America, because it basically means that all of us have been going, we're going back to Dred Scott, where it means that all of us, in some ways, the ubiquity of unfairness, where at that time it was 3/5 of a vote, where we could all become, 1/3 of the vote. In this case, the people who voted for President Trump approximately were becoming 7/10 of the vote.
Do you know if the Dominion machines have that weighted vote feature?
As I understand, if the fact that the votes are stored as decimal fractions means you could have external programs intersect, communicate with those programs and alter them using external software programs, which could also do weighted race features. But the important element here is that there's documented features of the weighted race feature as early as 2002, and our votes are stored as decimal numbers.
And they shouldn't be.
Would I be overly simplistic if I concluded the only reason you would want a machine with a weighted vote feature is in order to cheat?
It's enabling cheating. It's an enabling of one person, not one vote.
I mean, this is not a poll.
The feature enables.
This is not a poll. This is an absolute vote. And the only reason to have that feature would be if you're going to distort the vote.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it's a feature that is available for any person that has access. It's not even behind like a key or a code.
Did you do a Monte Carlo where you can do millions of possibilities in a minute to find a good match?
Yes, so that's what this is doing. There are many different techniques. The solver technique here, there are many different numerical methods, but essentially it's doing one of those kinds of approaches to find that fit.
And that's how you arrived at the one that you felt was the closest?
Yes.
And could you say with a degree of professional certainty that there's no question that this vote count in Arizona is faulty, false, not accurate, whatever words are comfortable?
Well, I think what I can say is that the plausibility of that, the cumulative vote count as we see it progress is highly implausible. The caveat being we don't have certain data on the, what percentage of demographics of independent voters, but from everything we've run and the simulations we've run, it's highly implausible the pattern of voting we saw that was reported by the Secretary of State of Arizona in Maricopa County.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you very much.
He was so good.
Members, any questions for Dr. Sheila? Any questions? Representative Cook, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question for the doctor. So earlier we had heard from a state senator, I believe, in his presentation, when it had the vote totals, it had a decimal point and then numbers after. And so this perfectly makes sense of what you're saying is one vote is one vote, two votes is two votes. But if there's some way there's something added to it electronically to have a weighted vote as a 1.25, so every vote for this person is a 1.25, would that be the way those decimal points got there?
Well, yeah, I mean, the issue is why
they weren't smart enough. They should have just had them be sure to always round and not leave the decimal. I mean, come on, just left right there.
I think this is their computer science or math, right? What they missed. So when a developer writes a program, it should be very important. I've been programming for many years.
They didn't think because
and the first thing you learn is when you are writing a software program, you have to be extremely conscious on how you're declaring variables, right? This variable is an integer, which means it can only be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This variable is going to be a decimal, which is also called a float or a double, which means it can be 1.1, 1.3, so on. So the fact that the vote count is stored as a decimal, to me, when I first learned about this in my own Senate race here in Massachusetts, was quite disconcerting, because this means that consciously people are putting into the software a capability to have fractional voting. And that's what this leads to. And why is there such a feature or capability, and why are our votes even being stored as fractions or decimals? And I think this is probably the central question of our time, probably going back to the 3/5 compromise of 1787. Do we have one person, one vote, or do we have one person, not one vote? And in the era of electronic software systems, I think the courts need to step in and re-clarify one person, one vote, going back to 1964, the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution.
Mr. Chairman.
This man is so intelligent. Like,
Okay,
you don't.
ladies and gentlemen,
it's Doogie Howser
we got
stuff.
a lot of ground to cover here, so I appreciate your passion, but can we just keep the applause to let's wait until we're done. Senator Borelli, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm not surprised. It's pretty much the modus operandi of the Democrat history anyway, to have a poll tax and actually tax the Republican to that vote goes to a Democrat. So that's what they did. They took that 30% or 0.3, whatever, tax the Republican vote and send it over to the Democrats. So I'm not surprised that the Democrats would want to tax the vote.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Members, any other questions?
I wasn't finished.
I'm sorry?
I wasn't finished, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please proceed, Mr. Cook. I thought you were done.
Thank you. I just wanted to finish up with what we were talking about. So now that we understand with the two witnesses that we've heard here today, how those decimal points gets in there, and Doctor's done a wonderful job. The question I have, Mr. Chairman, is when did you find this information about where the lines transected? At what point in time were you made aware of it? That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, who have you made aware of this? Have you made the Secretary of State of Arizona aware of this, or the Governor's Office or Attorney General's aware of this? Or has it just been the privileged information of the Trump team until now, just about the state of Arizona?
No, he's presented it online.
No, this was discovered about 24 hours to 48 hours ago. You're the first ones to actually see these graphs.
I've seen other graphs from him, but I guess not just this one. Okay.
Thank you,
wow.
Mr. Chairman, for your
That's
time.
huge.
Yeah.
You know, they just certified the Arizona vote today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question.
They had to get the certification done before the hearing.
Cindy Powell had mentioned some conflicts of interest with Dominion and these systems. She had said, her words were, governors and secretaries of states and other politicians have a vested interest in this system. I read from last year an article where Nancy Pelosi's former chief of staff sat on the board of the lobbying firm that represents Dominion. If what you're telling us is true, and there is some kind of interest by certain politicians to invest in this kind of a system, and I find it ironic that today is Cyber Monday and we're talking about this type of issue. Have you looked at that, of any kind of a nefarious background when you're looking at these weighted votes? Do you have any indication or any suspicion, or is this just a mistake or a fluke in data? Does this lend to her claim that there might be some nefarious motives behind this system?
It's a very, very good question you bring up. Let me give you from my own actual experience in this. You know, I ran for U.S. Senate in the Republican primary in Massachusetts, and I was deeply shocked when I found out that this weighted race feature existed. And pursuant to that, we issued FOIAs to actually get access to some very important data which helps us connect to validate whether the weighted race feature was on. And that is called the ballot images, the cast vote records, and it's called the list vote records. Now, what are those things? When you put a ballot into a machine, a paper ballot, and that machine is scanned, that machine creates what's called an image, a photograph. And when tabulation takes place, guess what's tabulated? Not the paper. In the electronic voting machines, the actual images. Does that make sense? So the images are tabulated. So when you get a result, if you want to validate the integrity of that result, the output, we must have access to the ballot images, and because the ballot images are used to generate the cast vote records and the list vote records, which are the actual counts of votes that were gotten. So when, in Massachusetts, for example, I applied for a FOIA to get this. The secretaries of state of Massachusetts, and I believe this may be true in many secretaries of state across the country, they responded back to me saying they deleted the ballot images. In fact, they destroy them, that they don't have to save them by state law. And it is my understanding, pursuant to USC 20701 and 20702, for federal elections, those ballot images must be saved in order to validate the integrity of the election. Well, in my case, when I started sharing this on Twitter on September 25th, the Secretary of State of Massachusetts contacted Twitter and shut me down for 21 days left in my election. And what came out in testimony in Massachusetts with a federal judge here was that the Secretary of State of Massachusetts has a special partnership with Twitter, where they were able to brand what I was sharing, that ballot images were destroyed, as election misinformation. And in addition, they called the National Association of State Election Directors, NASED, which is the association of all the state election directors, and they too got involved in contacting Twitter to shut down my tweets where I was exposing that ballot images which were destroyed, which would be the evidence showing that the weighted race feature was on. It's quite extraordinary. Well, the NASED is the group of all state election directors. So why was my tweet, when Twitter had not shut me off when I was talking about election fraud, but the state of Massachusetts Secretary of State and the state election directors found it threatening, because what I was essentially stating was that the state election directors of a number of these states are concealing the actual evidence which directly correlates whether which can expose whether the weighted race feature was on. So yes, I do believe it's nefarious. And if you go look at the National Association of State Election Directors, which is a nonprofit, they are funded, and they're an entity of Democracy Works. Democracy Works is funded by Rockefeller Brothers. It is also funded by the Murdochs, Catherine Murdoch And you can look at who is actually controlling
these people,
the state election directors, or what community are they part of. Now, why is this important? Because the state election directors and the secretaries of state are the ones who certify electronic voting systems. Which means, are they certifying electronic voting systems knowingly with the weighted race feature? And in my view, I know in Massachusetts that's what was done. And knowingly telling people, telling the vendors to delete ballot images, which are the evidence that interconnect the weighted race features being on and the ballot images. So in Massachusetts, the factory settings of these electronic voting machines, the default factory setting is to save all ballot images. What we discovered in Massachusetts is they tell the vendors to set that to off, which means delete, destroy all ballot images. And I believe that many of these secretaries of state are involved in this. So yes, I believe it is nefarious.
Thank you. And I just as a follow-up, I believe, and I was told recently that in Maricopa County with the machines and the Dominion, that in the RFP request for the procurement, that it says you are able to, this allows you to publish the images, and that we were requesting that those be published, and we have been denied that. So I'm in communication with the Board of Supervisors to see, is it possible to go ahead and put that up? So I would recommend the public also get involved in demanding to be able to see those, because, you know, apparently we have leaders in the state elbow bumping today in celebration of the certification of this election. And clearly what you're saying, we should be doing anything but. It's abhorrent, it's a shameful thing. It's a sad day in Arizona that we're celebrating the certification of this election.
Mr. Giuliani.
Cheaters never prosper.
Mr. Giuliani, do you have any follow-up questions?
My mom will tell you that.
I would just like the doctor to state his credentials.
Dr. Shiva, would you please state your credentials?
Sure. My name is Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. I hold 4 degrees from MIT. My undergraduate is in electrical engineering and computer science. I have 2 other masters. One is in scientific visualization from the MIT Media Lab, my master's. I also hold another master's from MIT in mechanical engineering, and my PhD is in a field called computational systems biology. You know, and when I was 14 years old, I created the first email system while working as a full-time research fellow at Rutgers Medical School. And at that time, I began trying to understand sleep patterns in babies, why babies were dying in their sleep, and looking at the patterns of signals to detect the anomalous signal and a normal signal. So the common thread throughout my entire life from the age of 14 till today has been pattern analysis, applying it to detect sleep patterns, handwriting recognition, and speech recognition, face analysis, understanding the analysis of signals to detect flaws in aircraft wings of airplanes or bridges. But pattern recognition is my field of expertise. And so what I just shared with people today is using that expertise to understand an anomalous situation, a implausible situation relative to normal situations. But in addition to my academic training, my industry background across the 7 companies I've done is starting companies and running companies which focus on pattern analysis and pattern recognition, a whole host of industries. But that's my background, Mayor Giuliani.
You can't miss.
Quite impressive.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva.
They have the brainiacs.
This is just an observation so far. We have heard a couple of terms thrown around, and I think rather carelessly, and I think you've put a very fine point on it. One is, these machines are supposed to tabulate. They're not supposed to calculate. They're just supposed to count, one for one. And I think you've put a very fine point on the notion that these aren't tabulation machines. These are machines that calculate and were built to do so. So I just want to thank you very much for making yourself available to us, and we appreciate your time.
That's a bombshell today.
Thank you, sir.
He said that they just got this the last 24, 48 hours.
That was the Holy Ghost, baby. That was Jesus. Jesus is going to expose this.
Shiva. Okay. Next up, we have
only
Mr.
Christians. Christians.
Please, Mr. Pitton.
The Michigan guy. He was the guy with
people
the
here. Announce your name, who you're with. Give like just a 10 seconds of what you're going to show us. And if you can, we are running short on time, so brevity is our friend. Thank you very much.
I'll try to go as quickly as possible. First of all, thank you very much for taking the time to hold this hearing, and I appreciate having the opportunity to speak. So thank you very much. I'd like to start by saying
they could have been getting this guy
just
set up
quoting
while
something
Shiva
from the
was
Federalist
talking.
Papers, which was written over 200 years ago. It was item number 68. Nothing was more to be desired than that every practical obstacle should be opposed to cabal, intrigue, and corruption. These most deadly adversaries of Republican government might naturally have been expected to make their approaches from more than one quarter, but chiefly from the desire in foreign powers to gain an improper ascendant in our councils. In my humble opinion, upon reviewing all the data that I'm going to go over and reading countless articles, clips, and videos over the past week, I think this is the biggest fraud in the history of our constitutional republic. Is taking place right before our eyes. The corrupt mainstream media and tech oligarchs are colluding in an attempt to assassinate the American public's true legal vote for our President Donald J. Trump through corrupt government officials across countless precincts and corrupt state officials and courts. The evidence will show that President Trump surpassed both FDR and Reagan in the percentage of legal votes, topping 60% when this crime is unveiled. So much of this process has been tainted that it will likely end up before the Supreme Court and allow one electoral vote per state cast, and hopefully Arizona does its part. And eventually the 35 of the 50 states will probably vote Republican, which will probably match his popular vote totals. So with that said,
this guy's hair, I just love it.
Curls. Basically what I've identified is that there's between 120,000 and 306,000 fake people. And I did this by looking at the data, and I'm not going to go over this sheet just yet. I want to kind of just highlight the bigger picture so that, because, you know, numbers can be, I love numbers, but they could be a little boring. So I want to kind of tell the story to the numbers. But basically, what I did is I took a completely different approach than what's been presented up to this point, based on the little that I've heard here. There's approximately 1,500 precincts in Arizona, and there's 3 classifications for male, female, and then you. I guess maybe that's the undecided classification. And then there's 5 different types of voters. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hard Republican, moderate, swing, moderate Democrat, hard Democrat. So there's 5 categories. And what I did is I looked through the age rolls, so 18 to 100, and I basically created a unique bucket, so to speak, for each of those classifications. So it turns out there's about 980,000 plus unique Arizona voters. And the way what I did is I didn't look at the total, I looked at the number of registered voters in the state. Because if the core data set is flawed, everything else that happens afterwards is irrelevant, in my opinion. Because, you know, so I kind of took an approach of how is the thing constructed. There's a very tedious process to organize all this. But then, once I got that organized, I broke out all of the male 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 votes. So I want you to think about, like, okay, there's 5 classifications of male voters in the state of Arizona. I summed up and looked at how many of those votes by age, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, across all those different categories. And then I did the same thing for females. And then I did the same thing for the U's. And this is, it was absolutely mind-boggling what popped out as a result of this incredibly tedious process. The correlation of men that voted in Arizona, so the first category, 1, you know, the number 1 voter versus 2, 1 versus 3, 1 versus 4, 1 versus 5, and then, you know, making sure that all possible combinations of male voters was accounted for. The average of those correlations for male voters is approximately 63.83%. That makes sense because, you know, people as they age, they're kind of random. They might fall into, you know, maybe they're liberal one time, maybe they're conservative the other time. They kind of bounce around. And the variation, the standard deviation is very high, as it should. People's life cycle changes. It's about 30%. So then I did the same thing for females. Now, I mean, I can ask a silly question, but I said no. My wife told me no jokes. But, you know, I'll get to the punchline. Are women more predictable than men when it comes to voting? Are they more independent? Now, people's first answer seems to be, oh, they'll do more of what, you know, their correlation should be higher. And actually, the opposite is true. They're at about 58%. So about 6 points higher, 6 points lower in terms of the correlation doing the same analysis. And that makes sense because most women don't want to tell you what they're doing when they go in the voting booth. So that's the joke. But anyways, so then what I did is I did the same thing for the U's. Now keep in mind, there's a total.
Bobby, excuse me. When you say U's, you're talking about undisclosed, not youths, as in younger. Okay.
Yeah, I like that from my cousin Vinny. Hey, there you go.
I'm glad you got the joke, Mr. Mayor.
Two youths. So what is a youth? But so basically, once I did that, there's 463,660 classified that I found under this category. I did that same analysis. Now keep in mind, the standard deviation for men was about 32.8%. For women, it was 35.77%. That there would be a lot of randomness through time across the aging process of human beings. With regards to the U, when I did that same analysis, 94% plus correlation. Let me say that again. 94% correlation. And I was like, this is insane. Like, this is like fictitious. It's like this. And now keep in mind, this was coming, I came up with this by going through all 1,500 precincts and unbundling all the data age by age across their sexual, you know, the M, F, and U, and then also what type of voter were they. So this is, and I happen to love data, so this was fun for me because I'm like, I have an idea of how they're cheating. I think they're cheating. So I'm going to test this theory out, and I'm more than happy to provide this to Mayor Giuliani. And so it was 94%. So then the next thing I did, I was like, oh, well, I want to see if something's wrong with the data. What should I do to make sure that I'm not wrong with this? Because I don't want to embarrass myself. So what I did is I took the buckets and I computed what does the distribution look like per age. So like, okay, how many, when I look at, hold on a second here. When I look at the buckets, how many U's are there in the first type of voter, second, third, fourth, fifth? And what I found is there's about 14,000 across time, 14,225, and on the type 1 Republicans. There's 122,203 type 2s, but what's fascinating is it's almost symmetrical on the type 4s. So 120,000, and I'm like, I asked my son, I'm like, hey, what do you think in terms of the U's? If you're conservative, are you more likely to go unclassified, or just throw that in, or fill it out based on your sex? He's like, you fill it out based on your sex. So it's like, so then I looked at that data, and I found that it's a bell-shaped curve. So if you looked at the ages and you went from 100 down to 18, the curve of the data is a nice bell shape. In the middle is 186,202 swing voters. The wings are 122,000 type 2, 120,000 type 4, and 14,000 type 1, and 20,000 type 5. But here's the kicker. when I'm like,
so
okay,
excited
let's
about
unpack each year. So the 18-year-olds, the 19-year-olds.
When he's saying
what's
use, I think he means use.
look like?
No,
when I
he's
do
saying
that,
those
and I
who
ran
did
a
not
max
give
function.
a gender.
So it's like,
okay.
obviously 0 is
I get
min.
it. Okay.
And then what's the maximum number of U votes in any given precinct in Arizona? So fair enough. I trade in the markets. I like to see what's the min-max, what's the range. I run that number, and then I ran the correlation of the maxes versus the, hold on a second, versus what the average number of votes per age group took place, and I ran that correlation. And would you believe it? It's over 97%. So it's like, holy cow, I think I reverse engineered the algorithm that they're using to do these damn votes. But unless you're willing to create 980,000 buckets, you know, you're going to have a hard time seeing it. Because everybody's used to doing the data, you know, bundle it up. Only look at the type 1, look at the type 2, you know. And in this algorithm, I mean, basically what the data is showing, and I think, frankly, this is a call out to our President Trump. Please, please, please do this for the entire country. I think we deserve an audit of every county in America after seeing this. And so basically, when I love this man. Now I'd like to go, before I even started this minutia project, that's what I call it, the minutia project. This took me over 25 hours to do. I decided, you know what, I like to look at metadata. So metadata, you guys should look into it if you don't know what it is. I don't want to get into a philosophical discussion about it, but metadata is, I said, okay, if I landed in Arizona, I want to understand what's been going on in Arizona before I say anything. And I pulled back, on your website, you have 22 years of election results, going back to 1998. So this is what's up here. And what I did is, I think I'm using this, is that me? Okay, so basically, what I did is I went to the census, and I pulled the census data on Arizona by each county. So I looked at 2000, I looked at 2010, I looked at the estimate for 2019, and then you can see I calculated what the annualized growth rate of each county was, and then what the growth rate was from 2000 to 2010, which is column B. Then I looked at column C, which is, you know, what was it from 2010 to 2019, and I extrapolated the data for one more year because we don't have the 2020 results. So I kind of went through this whole process, and I did that before the minutia, and I wanted to see, like, okay, well, what does the census say with regards to how many people are of voting age? So if I scroll down, you can see over here, you know, right now, for example, 27% of Apache is under the age of 18. This is, once again, I didn't use any of my own data. I used government data. So if there's a problem, take it up with the government. So basically, I computed what is the number of voters per year. Now, keep in mind, since the census doesn't come out every year, I had to fill in based on the annualized growth rate between each census and kind of adjust it accordingly, because I don't want to just spitball it. I wanted it to be tied to the math and make sure that each year filled out. So then from there, I went in and physically typed in all of the reported eligible voters each year. Because I got to tell you, Arizona does not make it easy to standardize, you know, to pull down the data in each county. Anyways, I had to go physically do this, which is time consuming, but I thought it was extremely important for what I was asked to do. So I did that, and then I did the reported ballots cast, and then I did that each year for each of the 2 year cycles.
I wish Right Side would give us.
And then I typed in the number of precincts that were reported, and then as I kind of do that, you know, I came up with reported eligible voters as a percentage of total population. Once I did that, registered eligible voters as a percentage of voting age population. So here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
So I kind of did that, and I'm like, okay.
The problem is that in order to figure this stuff out, we need these guys.
I think voting fraud has been happening in this state and possibly nationwide much longer than the past 4 years.
Because they
I'm looking at the data.
It was going to take these guys.
And it looks as though it's going back to at least 2008.
What are you guys going to do about it?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's above my pay grade. So
if we have any more of that, we'll ask to have you removed from the room. I've asked several times, please hold your comments. We've been okay with some applause, but the purpose of this hearing is to gather information. Let me be really clear about that.
They need it to be professional, guys. This is
Mr.
the whole
Benton,
world
if
is
you can,
watching.
I need to have you wrap this up within the next couple of minutes, okay?
I will. I'll wrap it up right now. Can I grab one of these waters, though? Is that right? Is that?
Yeah, help
Thanks.
yourself.
So, so basically, what I did is I looked at the 2000 presidential election, 2004, 2008, and I looked at all the eligible voters, and that's in column S here, and I said, okay, how many eligible voters showed up to vote in those 3 presidential cycles? Then I tied it to 2008, 12, 16 as a pivot, and I said, wow, it went from 79% in Apache to 86.93%. But then the change from the average of 2008, 12, 16 presidential cycle went from 87% to 99% of all eligible voters in Apache voted in 2020 is what the data is. You know, that's how many registered voters there are. It's like, what? 99%? So since I'm in a little bit of a rush, I went through and did that for each of the counties and showed what the results look like in each respective presidential year, the three years, and then the off years to compare those two numbers. And the correlation, once again, the difference between those 2 years, if it's a presidential cycle versus a regular cycle, there's about an 88% correlation. That should give you some idea of how meaningful that 94% was. And so I went through and did that, and then I did the same thing with the ballots cast as a percentage of total population, ballots cast as a percentage of Arizona population, and a couple of things I want to highlight since I'm running out of time. The population of Arizona has gone up by about 1% per year in the past decade. The number of people voting per year has gone up by about 7% per year. Now that may not seem like a big deal, but if you had $100,000 and you invested it at 1% after a decade, you would have $111,000. Not bad. But if you had $100,000 and you invested it at 7% for a decade, you'd have $195,000. So it's like, wait a second, how is it that you have 95,000 versus 11,000? So when you look at the differential growth rates, that's how meaningful it is, that this has been occurring going back a decade, that it's almost like a little creep. They were, somebody was maybe cheating a little bit somewhere, and then they needed to cheat a little bit more, and then they needed to cheat a little bit more. And the reason why I say this is, being in the financial markets my whole career, Sarbanes-Oxley, remember that? Everybody remember WorldCom and Enron? They had to sign. The CFO and the CEO have to sign the financials, the 10K and 10Q, which is in force since the 33 and 1934 Securities Act. Guess who was exempted from that act? Counties and states. Maybe they should be not exempted anymore. If you're going to sign something when billions of dollars are on the line, we should believe in the data. We have the CEOs get clawed back. We get the CFOs jail time. So if you cheat, there should be repercussions. And the laws are on the books for this. All we have to do is, here, I'll give you an example. If you're a CEO of a company and it's worth $20 billion and there's a fraud internally and somebody steals $1 billion, if you don't prosecute them and you don't uncover it and investigate it, you're violating your fiduciary responsibility, you're going to get fired, you're going to get sued, and the investors are going to take you through the ringer. But for some reason in politics, that doesn't happen, which is mind-boggling, because this country's worth $100 trillion. This election about controlling $100 trillion of wealth in the United States is very serious business. And so this is one of the reasons, so I'm kind of wrapping it up here because I know you asked me to cut it short.
Mr. Fitton, can we do 60 seconds?
60 seconds.
I think Mr. Giuliani may have a question for you.
So the population of Arizona has gone up by 40% since 2000. The number of voters in 1998 in Arizona was 1.1 million. It's 3.2 million today. So it's like tripled, but the population's up 40%. Something's off.
Thank you, sir. Mayor Giuliani?
I love this guy.
If you could just tell us in your, in the simplest way possible as an expert, what is your opinion as to the validity of the numbers that were certified today by the Secretary of State and the governor about this election?
If I was an executive at a publicly traded company, I would never sign that because I risk jail time and having all my money taken from me in lawsuits. So to answer your question, I would never, ever have certified. I'd rather resign than have certified those results.
Wow.
So your professional opinion is that the numbers are fraudulent?
I believe they're fraudulent based on the data. And my sister asked me a simple question this morning. She goes, how sure are you? And my sister's a pretty stubborn person like me. And I said, I'd be willing to put my life on it. I'm that sure about the analysis, assuming that the data that I got from the state and everything else was accurate. So, you know, if you're giving me all inaccurate data from everywhere, then, you know, that's my only caveat.
And could you tell us your professional background, please?
I'm a portfolio manager. I had my CFA since I was 23. I got my MBA from Kellogg in organizational design and strategy. I'm working on a financial engineering degree at the moment. I like math for fun. I believe math is the language of the universe.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Very helpful.
Somebody asking the correlation thing for who the 94% people.
Mr. Pitton, would you be willing to furnish that file? I mean, I get the math.
Oh, absolutely.
You've given me a headache though, but would you be willing to furnish that to this committee and Jump Drive or whatever? I just want to make sure that it's not protected by copyright or anything like that. And if at the same time, I believe Mr. Giuliani would probably like to have that.
Drive right here, you can have it.
Well, we'd rather copy it, but thank you very much. All right, very good. Thank you very much, sir.
He's so cute.
Nervous. I'd be nervous as all
Thank you very much. Next up, we have
nobody understood
Marissa
what he was
Hamilton
talking about, but
and
I'm so
Elizabeth
glad
Harris.
we heard from him.
Are you in here yet?
He was very enthusiastic and he's willing to put his life on the line for what he told us.
If
Here's
you would
the thing.
please come to the table.
He's going to go home and his wife and his sister and be like,
very brief,
you
10 seconds,
missed the point to try to explain it to the people.
And if you would,
but you know
the
what?
hour grows late. We're at 3 o'clock already. So if you can keep it to no more than 10 minutes, we'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, 7
Thank
minutes.
you.
Hello, my name is Liz Harris, and what I intend to show is I actually am the one who brought Bobby Piton into this, and I only brought him into this on Friday. So if you can imagine what he can do with you know, a week's worth of time, it would be amazing. And I really hope that someone looks at hiring him, or he might volunteer his services, I don't know, at looking at all the challenged states and all the states in the United States of America to see what states were affected. Okay, thank you very much. Again, my name is Liz Harris. I reside in Chandler, Arizona, which is in Maricopa County. I am the owner of a small business, a real estate brokerage. In December 2019, I was asked to consider a run for AZ State House of Representatives. At that time, I knew politics was divisive, and I gladly took on the challenge and ran an extremely clean campaign. I lost by a very small margin. When I went to vote on Friday, October 30th, 2020, everything seemed to be safe and secure, and I was told that my vote would be picked up the following day at noon. I even did a Facebook Live to ensure the residents of Arizona that we have a safe and secure voting system. However, with what I personally witnessed, the testimony we're hearing today, and the research I've buried myself in since the election day, I heavily doubt that Arizona has a secure system. When I question the events, I am frequently told there is nothing we can do about it except fix the legislation over the next 2 years to remedy these issues. I believe that is what we were told in 2018. On election day, I visited 8 voting centers. Each voting center had approximately 2 people in blue shirts marked poll observers. They were all uniformed and all Democrat. Interestingly, when I and others spoke to them, the majority was from California. Some were even admitted attorneys. Gee, California, wasn't that the same state that injected much of the $1.8 million in attack ads against my running mates and me, which is unprecedented for a state election? The observers remained in close proximity to the 75-foot line and were sure to tell volunteer Republicans when they felt they were violating the 75-foot rule. At one location, a poll observer quickly left his station to bring out the election inspector, who accused me of yelling at voters. When I told him I believed he was mistaken, he went to harass two young Republican college students who were handing out voter guides outside the 75-foot markings. The election inspector then continued to tell these young gentlemen that they were harassing voters. I came to their defense as a witness that they were doing no such thing. This confrontation lasted well over 5 minutes. It honestly felt like the entire event was orchestrated just to intimidate. At another polling station, undisclosed location, someone deliberately removed over a dozen of my signs and my two running mates' signs and left them down so they were not in the voters' line of sight. No big deal. Nearly 60 other signs were perfectly positioned. My running mate and I reinstalled the signs. I then learned that this polling center was also the receiving station on election night. This meant that many voting centers within my legislative district sent a day and a half worth of ballots to a polling station that was clearly biased against us. It was an odd location to centralize ballots, access was not easy, and the lighting was extremely poor. Knowing the bias against us, the faith that I had in the Arizona system began to diminish. While I was visiting the polls, I can testify to 3 polling locations that basically broke down in the middle of people voting. And what happened was those lines of people were sent home, not sent home, but sent to other locations to go vote elsewhere. That was all questionable. All sorts of stories, they ran out of ink, they ran out of, nothing made sense. Learning that we did indeed use Dominion software in Arizona, and that Eric Coomer sold it in October of 2019 and was involved in the training process, I further lost confidence in the integrity of our election. Eric Coomer clearly identifies as an anti-Trump Antifa apologist, as seen on his social media pages dating back to 2015. All of these pages have since been removed. Considering that on my campaign trail, I was heavily attacked by Antifa, including a really bad death threat, which I had a nightmare about last night. Once again, I have little confidence in the state's discernment of who they select to do business with. Several days after the election, I asked the AZ GOP for a sample of voters over the age of 90. Using a nationally known background checker, I found a third deceased, a third where I could not find a record of the person existing or a social security number tied to the person, and then a third who were alive and well. This led me to ask for a larger sample size. I got a really large sample size of 30,600. Fellow concerned citizens performed these checks with me and found not only deceased voters at a rate of 0.1%. Now realize that number is going to go down, and I don't think deceased voters is our issue in Arizona, but we did 3 audits, and actually on some we did a quadruple audit. And what we did is we made sure before we classified a person as dead, we looked for the obituary. We did everything except visit the tombstone. This was thorough. But more importantly than the dead voters was the voter whose identity we could not verify or find a record of. And that consistently ran at 10%. Now, if you take that 10% and you look at 3.3 million voters, that is right in line with what Bobby Piton just presented to you. Multiple cases of voters who voted twice, again, that number is not that large. 22,903 ballots that have receipt dates prior to the ballots being sent out. Now, I just want to say, very often we hear, oh, those are the military ballots. But then we have an additional 4,854 ballots that were received 10/7 and 10/8. Now we all know the ballots mailed on 10/7. My household received 1 on 10/8 and 2 on 10/9. And we have 2,000 votes, which uses an address that is a vacant lot. When we examined that address, it turned out to be an area of Phoenix where homeless tents are erected. However, it was not 2,000 tents. Of course, the homeless have every right to vote, but the numbers are overwhelming. This leads me to question, was the state of Arizona in any way negligent when they assured the Arizona residents that we have a next to perfect mail-in ballot system because we have been at it for over 2 decades? I requested that a friend, Bobby, look at the data to help me decipher exactly where, if any, of the abnormalities were occurring, and he had much to report. That 30,000 was a lot to go through. You can imagine what it would be to go through 3.3 million. With Bobby's report, he has now identified for me 450,000, and our auditing team is more than happy to start going through those 450,000 voter registrations and people who voted to decipher which of these ballots is fraudulent. For us to certify this election at 11 a.m. this morning and allow our electors to pass the Arizona vote to Biden based on all the information presented here today is an absolute travesty without a solid investigation. Thank you very much.
They rushed to do it, but it had to get done before this hearing.
Ms. Harris, I've got one question for you, and we're going to move on to the next witness. You have got a workforce that is committed to doing this. What is your estimation on how long it would take to work through a sample of, shall we say, 30% of your highest number?
It's got to get done before December 14th.
I'm very aware of that, but...
So to verify that a voter doesn't exist, you actually have to go to the residence and basically, in my opinion, get a recording from the person who resides there stating that they are not alive or that that person has never lived there. You need proof that there's a murder, you need a murder weapon, and you need a witness to the murder. So we can do this in 7 days.
Wow.
That's the answer I was looking for. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
And
God bless America.
would you please see to it that Mayor Giuliani has your information? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, next up we have Jan Bryant.
What?
I'd be so shaky.
Oh, I know.
So she's been,
All right.
out of
Jan, would you please come to
30,000
the
people,
table
she's
and,
finding
have a
people
seat,
that
give your
do not
name and
exist.
and move forward.
That voted.
And just so we
They are
can keep this
going to
going,
people's
we also
houses,
have
knocking on the
Greg
door. Do they live here?
You know
no,
who should
they
be
don't
doing
live
this?
here.
The government should be
Wadniewski
doing this.
on deck.
These people are doing this by volunteer. They aren't getting paid for this.
Right. And so he's saying, can you do it
Thank
like,
you, Jen. If you don't mind, could you give your name and briefly
could you do 30%
why
of
you're
that?
here?
And how long would it take
you've
to
got about
knock
5
on the door and
minutes
say,
to
do you live
explain.
here?
She said
Okay.
7 days.
I'll knock on the door. Do you live here?
I'm going to Arizona.
Jan, it's easier.
Thank you.
I am a retired Maricopa resident for 6 years since I retired.
Do you know how many
Before I
volunteers they could
retired,
get
I was
after
a
today?
Senior manager at a
They could get the whole
fairly major utility.
Well, they
running a
got
big
volunteers to get the fake
multi-million-dollar
votes through
technology project.
from out of state.
So
Right?
I have some experience. I have an MBA, so I'm not just an old retired lady. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. And I was this is my first election I ever volunteered for. So I'm a huge volunteer for a lot of things, but this is the first time here in any election. And some things happened. I worked at a couple of polling centers, but mostly I was at the Maricopa County Ballot Tabulation Center. And that's the stories that I want to share today that I found some issues with.
Come on, girl.
And I'll tell you the biggest thing. I have no idea how this happened, but on November 10th, we were on a night shift. It was about 9:30, and I actually was watching the people doing the duplication ballots, and so they were hand entering military and overseas ballots. That happened behind a wall, so if there are any camera people shooting through the glass window, you could not see those people who were hand entering ballots. So all of that work went on behind a wall. So you walk around behind the wall. We were allowed to go back there and watch, and I did. But it just would be random if you happened to go by and something weird happened. This first incident that I had, they had a duplicate ballot, and these are printed off at a company called Runback, I believe, and then they bring them over and they're hand entered. And they call it the duplication process. Anyway, that ballot numbers were identical. The system does not allow for a duplicate ballot entry, so it kicked it out. I didn't really think any issue of it. I thought it was weird. There was 2 copies of the identical ballot in this stack of ballots that one Republican and one Democrat employee were entering. But I didn't record that. But then later that evening, and I said that was about 9:30, I did record this one. There was a ballot with a red vote for president, a red pen, and these are copies. There should be no red ink on any of these ballots. And so the 2 ladies that were entering the ballots stopped and said, "This is weird. We have there's no red marks." It was the only mark for president. It happened to be for Biden, but it didn't matter. It was an anomaly. And so why was that red ink on that ballot? I don't know. I never did find out. So that was weird. They called Scott Jarrett over, and he actually said, apparently there's a committee that reviews any ballots that can't be determined in the room at the time. So Scott said, put it aside. Well, and he walked away, and I stood there for another minute, and luckily, because the next 2 ballots were duplicate copies, but not red ink, just black, same mark, same vote, and the same ballot number. And so we called, I don't know why. So we called Scott back, and he took all those ballots and put them in a manila folder, so I couldn't get a ballot number or any other information, and set it aside and said, this will go to the committee tomorrow. And I did bring that up with the person that I was reporting to and said, we need to find out what happened to these ballots, because this is something really unusual. So that was a very specific incident. I want to say there were a lot of small incidents, but nothing that I could say this really made me very nervous to see that happen. And then back to my opening, where I wanted to tell you that I do have a pretty strong project management technology background. This is not, I would say, everybody raves about how well run and how tight this room is that we were working in. I was in the tabulation center, the glass and the servers in a glass room, and all the computers are on a single cable that you can see. None of that matters, because 2 things. One, Dominion employees were the only ones that were running any of that equipment. So and I was in the tabulation center 6 different days, day and night shifts. And no county employees, no IT people, no one else was touching any of the software. They did all the training for the adjudicators. They ran all the reports, and so...
And we trust these people.
I brought that up on my very first day in the room.
We trust these people, right?
I said, this doesn't seem right. As a person with my background, never in a million years would I turn my company's most important thing over to someone else, and there's only 2 guys, and they had the whole control of everything. I also participated in the random ballot selection for hand audit, picking the ballots, determining which bin we were going to select. And even that, Dominion ran the reports for. So no one, they knew exactly what was in the hand audit boxes. That made me nervous also. And they also knew when we pulled the last box, which was probably 8 days before they quit counting ballots. So I don't know. That's all I can tell you is what I observed. I can't tell you that there was anything wrong. I just can tell you what I observed. And as a senior manager over big projects, never in a million years would I have allowed some of the stuff that I saw going on there. The other thing that I wanted to make sure, the final week that they were counting ballots, I came in, I think, on a Tuesday. When I had left the Friday before, I did not notice there was a laptop in the room behind the wall that John, one of the Dominion employees, was working on. And when I came in on that Tuesday and walked around where they were doing the hand entry of ballots, I also noticed that laptop sitting there, and John was working on it. And it's not a secure room. If you're bringing a laptop in and out of a room, who knows what happened there. And every one of the 50 potentially
internet
desktops that were in there had a row of USB ports on the side of it. So I get very angry when I hear some of our leaders here saying, oh, it's secure, nothing can get in or out. That's not true. So I will tell you that is probably the biggest issue that I have.
These Dominion guys framed his whole puppy.
There were 3 rows of adjudicators, so, and you may have heard this before or seen it, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, sitting at they call them boards, but it's a monitor, and adjudicating any issue ballots that kick out that can't be tabulated automatically. And
who interviews the Dominion reps?
No one.
Who does a background check on
the
them?
first few days I was in there, we were allowed to walk between the rows, so we could get fairly, they were very close together. So with COVID and everything else, it was awkward anyway, but we could walk between them, and we were all wearing masks, by the way. But anyway, when I came back in I can't tell you the day, but they were placing stickers on the floor to keep us away, so we could only see the back row of monitors and get close enough to see anything that was happening. So I would say that the reason they gave was that one of the observers had gotten too close and was actually like touching people. I do not know, I wasn't there, that's the reason I was told. But then we were not allowed the rest of the time anywhere near the rest of the monitors. So we could see the back, I don't know how many were on the back row, but we could see all those pretty clearly. But other than that, I couldn't tell you what was happening on the adjudication. Let's see, there was one more thing that wasn't on my list. They reset the tabulation machines 3 times to 0.
I beg your pardon, I didn't hear you.
Reset the tabulation machines 3 times to 0.
At what point?
Throughout, because they did not know, and this is literally what Dominion and Renee, who works for the county, told me. They didn't know what would happen after so many batches had gone through those new high-speed tabulation machines. So apparently they can take a card out and start over at 0. Now, as observers, we were recording the counts on each of those machines at the end of each shift. And then when it started over at 0, we recorded that. So it's recorded, and it wasn't hidden. But I just want to say, again, how poor of a project is this that you didn't test for how much data was going to come through, that they had no idea. So they were afraid that the machines would crash, or I don't know what they thought. They didn't know what would happen, so they zeroed them out again to start counting over. So, and I just want to say, I am retired. I'm here because I don't want to cry, but I love my country, and I never thought in a million years I would have to be here talking about stuff like this. So.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Giuliani, do you have a question? Or two?
Mr. Chairman, this is part of the damage that's been done
That's on Right Side Broadcasting.
by this horrendous fraud on the American people, not just here in Arizona, but throughout the country. People like this, who are patriotic, decent Americans, they're trying to do
It all comes
honest
down
job,
to Dominion,
and
as
they're in
Cindy
the middle
Powell
of a
was
gigantic
saying.
swindle
And that's
by
why
a political
she spent
party
so much
that
time
lost its soul probably 20 years
going
ago.
after Eric Coomer.
So
and
may I just ask you a few
software.
questions so that we get your testimony was excellent. But I just
Would
want
you
to get
trust
organized a little bit
a known
better.
bank
How many
robber
days did you
to
how many days were you on
your
reserve?
No, it's more like,
bank
would you
account?
trust a
How many
known
days
bank
altogether?
robber's cousin?
I was in the tabulation
about-
center 6
Yeah,
days.
or Dominion is a subsidiary.
So you were solely the
Venezuelan
tabulation center, not the polling place.
I was at a polling place for half shifts.
I was thinking about Eric Coomer.
But I didn't bring up any.
But your testimony is about the calculation center.
Yes, the tabulation center.
And you say here on November 3rd, 2020, you observed at the Maricopa County BTC for the first time that it seemed strange that the tabulation and adjudication hardware and software were only run by Dominion employees. That meant that none of the county employees had access to them?
To the software, the people who were actually doing the adjudication and running the tabulation machines, those were temp employees or employees of the county.
But the
running
software
was
and the
Dominion.
hardware
Yes.
was handled solely by
By
Dominion.
There were 3 total employees, 2 mostly was.
Were you led to understand that there should be no internet communication with that room to the outside world?
Yes, they even pointed out that the servers are only plugged into the electrical outlet. There's no internet. But if you bring a laptop in, all bets are off. So.
Of course, during the course of this hearing, we've seen, I would imagine, millions of communications out of that center and back into that center. So whoever told you that was just lying completely.
And they said a lot. I mean, that's like they're...
But to support that, you did see a computer. How many did you see? How many computers did you see?
Total computers in the room? Probably 50 to 60.
And they wanted you to believe that they weren't communicating with anything?
They were
playing
supposedly
games?
hardwired to the server and no other access was what we were told. So.
But the server.
But the laptop. I don't know, because I did
But
not.
the server goes places.
Didn't get close enough to see what was going on there.
Did, when they were doing adjudications would be the ballots that were put aside because there was something questionable about them, correct?
Adjudication, the tabulation machine kicks it out because a lot of times it's just a write-in candidate, which is totally legitimate, or stray marks on the ballot that made it, or overvotes, so they voted for 2 candidates where there was only 1. So all of those things kick out, and they told me that 1 in 8 ballots kicks out for adjudication.
1 in 8?
1 in 8, yes.
1 in 8 ballots. And when they were examined, were you able to observe the examination?
The adjudicators, that's the part where I could see the back row. They did not have hard copies of the ballot. It was fully up on the screen. And all they were doing was determining why the tabulation system kicked out the ballot and then trying to make a decision based on what the voter intended. So they tried not to throw ballots out if they could understand.
Was there a Republican present to listen to that?
Each board had 1 Republican and 1 Democrat. That's what they told us. So
well, when you say that's what they told us, what does that mean?
I will tell you, on the last few days, they pulled in a whole bunch of employees to be the Republican, or you could be an independent also. So
when you say they pulled in a whole group of employees to be Republicans, you mean they were county or
they were
county employees who
yeah.
they said were Republican?
Or independent. I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Or independents.
You had to have 2 parties, and it could be 2 of the 3. So either independent / libertarian, or Republican, or Democrat. So 2 of the 3.
And why are you in doubt that they were actually Republicans?
Because I was in the room a lot, and everyone in there, not everyone, but I will tell you that a high percentage of the employees in that room were Democrat. And I will tell you that I walked out with one of the adjudicators, a temp employee. She was very upset because she was the Republican adjudicator, and she said she heard a lot of people cheering every Biden vote, and people who worked there. So she was upset when we were walking out, and I said, you need to tell whoever you're working for. I don't know what to tell you to do at that point.
Did they have Republican identification of some kind?
They wear a lanyard, red, blue, or yellow.
So they faked the adjudicators.
But you doubted if they were Republicans.
I doubt those last few days that those were.
And that's when the fishiest stuff happened.
You only need is 10,000 votes in the last few days, baby.
Did you get a chance to observe that?
I did not watch the signature, but there are some people behind me that did.
Pardon me?
There are people coming in the room next that did work. You see the signature.
And when you say you as a project manager, you were shocked. Can you just elaborate just a little bit?
This is the most important thing going on in the country right now, and this whole thing is run more sloppy than any project.
Because of the mail-in ballots.
I just can't believe that this is how we run elections. I just can't. And that we sign off on this. I mean, has it always been like this? Like I said, this is my first time.
No, because we didn't have millions of mail-in ballots.
Did you detect a bias in it? A bias?
I didn't personally, but they knew who I was, so.
Pardon me?
They knew I was the Republican official observer.
No, I mean a bias in the way in which they were doing it.
In the way? No, I can't say that.
Okay. Thank you.
That's good that she answered that way. That shows
Thank
that
you,
she's
Jen.
honest. She's not just.
I believe, did somebody raise their hand? Yes. Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ma'am, you spoke earlier about, you said that the tabulation machines were set 3 times over a period, if that was one evening or over the period, over the whole period. You said that it was recorded. That's good. Do you have any inclination as to why that could or could be problematic?
The only thing is when you start over it, I mean, they're keeping track of how many ballots are running through each machine, and so they're getting reset to 0. They all were reset at the same time, so it all happened on the same day, on the same shift. So what was problematic was that shows me that they did not have a tested system in there, because they literally told me they didn't know what would happen if it went over 1,000 batches on any machine. So that rather than have that happen and not know what was going to happen with the ballots or the tabulation or anything, they just.
It's a really good point.
And they specifically used that term, they didn't know what would happen if it went over 1,000 batches?
Batches, I think they call. doesn't seem like the right name, but I'm losing the name right now, but 1,000 somethings going through there, so.
Thank you. Mr. Cook?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman, to that point. So how can I feel comfortable with, and what I just heard you say and my colleague talk about? So if I get this right, they ran 1,000 batches, vote totals come up for one party or the other. Now, I don't want you to know that, but vote totals come up for one party or the other or candidates. What I heard you say is, so you document what those votes are, or they...
We documented the number of ballots that had gone through that machine each shift. And so we had a number that was incrementally going up every shift. And then...
Okay, so then they go to 0.
That's important, incrementally.
So is that information is put over here for what that batch is?
I don't know what happened to the original.
So so what I'm trying to get to is, how can I feel comfortable that, are there 10 batches? Are there 9 batches? Were there 15 batches and only 9 batches counted? And I go back to what I have seen is when they were doing an audit in another state and the woman had her video recorder on and everybody knew it and said, well, how many batches are there? Well, we thought we were through, but we have 6 or 8 more boxes of batches we can't find. And that's what I'm trying to get to here in Arizona. How do we know that that wasn't the case there? Can you give me some assurance? Because I would really like to have some.
I can't, and I don't know who could, but I will tell you what you just said triggered another thought. The Wednesday before the Friday that we quit voting, so 10 days before they quit tabulating, they thought they were done. And then more truckloads of ballots would come in, and I'm like, how can you not know how many ballots are still out there?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, would you repeat that? Yeah. They thought they were done, and then there was what?
Multiple times, the people that were running the rooms thought they were done or almost done, or were going to be done Wednesday morning, then Thursday morning, then Friday morning, then it went on the whole next week. And I'm like, I asked the question, I'm like, you don't know how many ballots are still left to come in? So I don't know. I don't know who does, again, process project management.
On that,
0.
On that point, ma'am, I'm tracking with you, but what day did the truck show up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, because what I heard the first time, what I thought I heard is a truckload of ballots showed up.
Okay, just a minute. I want to make sure that we capture this properly. So there were trucks that showed up on the 3rd, and then the 4th, and then the 5th. And how long did that go on? How many days?
I wasn't there the whole last week, but I know.
For as long as you can recall, how many days?
My last day was the 10th, and they were still coming in.
Trucks?
Coming from a company called Runback that does the high-speed scanning and printing of duplications and I think the military ballots. So now I'm getting
the duplications. Now we now know the duplications are the ballots that got kicked out.
A high-speed scanning company called Runback that. Apparently you haven't heard of Runback?
No, I've heard of Runback, ma'am. But what I'm trying to figure out is whether they printed them or they scanned them, and if they scanned them off-site, to what purpose?
I can't tell you.
Because wasn't that your job to scan them? Well, I think not your job, but.
Yeah. No, all the high-speed scanning happens at Runback. So those ballots go to Runback. As far as I know, there were no observers there. I don't know. I never got called to work at Runback. That's all I can tell you.
Okay, with all due respect, Mr. Cook, now we've opened up a whole new can of worms.
Yeah, and again,
so
I don't know enough about it to be the witness.
No, that's fine. Your observation is useful here. So what you're telling me, I'm going to play this back to you a second. The scanning wasn't actually done on site at a Maricopa County structure. It was done someplace else.
Where they have very high-speed scanners, yeah.
Well, right now, I really don't care what the speed is. I want to know, were they Dominion scanners? Or they were...
No, I don't think it has anything to do with Dominion.
So I'm trying to understand, what was the purpose of scanning them in advance of them being tabulated on the Dominion equipment?
They were duplications, the ballots that wouldn't read through the tabulation machines. They were ballots that came in from military and overseas. But there were more ballots than that. So I don't know where the rest of them were coming from, because they kept bringing trays of them in. So I don't know where they were coming from. That's a question for the county employees to explain.
Okay.
Where those ballots came from. That whole
an absentee ballot.
I don't know where they came from.
We look at it.
Are you done?
We look at the signature. We got 10
I'm
people's
sorry,
eyes on
Mr.
it. We look at it. We go,
Mr.
boom,
Giuliani.
Biden,
So you were there from
boom,
the
Trump.
3rd
And we got a
until the 10th.
chalkboard.
Okay,
We're
so
doing
7
chalkboards
days
from now
later,
on.
ballots were still coming in. And were those ballots counted?
on.
Yeah, I watched them go
Did
through.
you observe them being
I watched them
counted?
go through the tabulation machines, and I watched people working on the adjudication.
I'm sorry. We got to take
those.
And how many ballots?
Every ballot, every envelope.
What was the largest number you saw in any one day?
Oh, man.
Lord have mercy.
No, just a guess.
Lord have mercy.
How many cartons?
Okay, there was, and I wasn't there, like, there was usually 2 or 3 shifts, so I want to say one day they thought 90,000 was a good number.
So
for a
one day
shift.
was...
For a shift, and if they were running multiple shifts.
And which day was that? One of the
Oh, I
middle
don't know.
days, one of the end days?
It was in the middle, probably.
Somewhere in the middle between the 3rd and the 10th?
Yeah.
90,000?
Yeah.
And then other days it was approximately the same, or?
Some were less, some were more. So some days when they had the 3 shifts, well, they never had
And
3
we're
shifts.
separated by
Sorry,
10,000
they
votes.
just would
Can we
run-
just
that's okay.
remember
You don't
that
have
for
to
a
count.
second?
Tabulation shifts.
What was
so-
the lowest number, you think?
There were some days when maybe there was only 15,000. Boy, please
15?
do not hold me to these numbers because I.
Was that toward the end?
No, that would have been earlier.
To the beginning?
Yeah.
In other words, there were more ballots at the end than the beginning?
There were ballots. They were backing up, was what I would say. They're
And what
not,
about-
not more coming into the building necessarily, but there's a room that we could see with rows and rows of bins of
These were
ballots.
coming in a different way?
Yes, I don't know.
They're
Some
coming in
come
the
from
back door.
Some come from the mailbox or from the postal service. They all go through a couple of, they get the signature verified, then they get the separated from the envelope, and then they end up somehow in the room that I was
So
in.
if I understand this correctly, ballots were coming in 2 different ways?
At least, yeah, from the post
Front door,
office.
back door?
Well, I think they were all the back door.
Oh, they were all the back door?
All the back door. None came in the front door.
But this group was 15,000 for a low, 90,000 for a high. And then those last couple of days when you were there, the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th, how many?
It was pretty average. They were still running full-time.
Like 90,000?
long shifts. Yeah, probably 80 to 70 to 80 maybe.
Wow. Anybody explain them?
Explain.
Did anybody explain what they were?
I did not ask every time. I asked a few times, so I understand some of them, but.
I'm
Senator
so
Allen, you have a
confused
question?
about the duplicates.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bryant, I'm
Yeah, I
curious, why
understand the
did the
duplicates is
county,
if it's
on the
got
last
an
day,
error, they have to
the last
reprint
day,
it.
And then
brought
those all
in
run into the system
county
from-
They go to the
employees to
red
take
back,
part of
right,
being part of
whatever,
the observers?
and then they come back.
Why did
They
they,
weren't observing, they were actually adjudicating, so they.
Oh,
were doing-
adjudicating,
yes,
okay.
I think they just needed all hands on deck, so, I mean, that was the intent, was to get the work done, finish counting, because they kept thinking they were done, and.
well, because I was heard that then, because I was thinking that you were saying they were to make up for the lack of not having Republican there.
Yep.
So were we short of having volunteers to go in and observe in Maricopa?
I don't believe so. There was always at least 2 of us in the tabulation center, and at least one in one of the other rooms, the signature verification. What the employees were doing was the adjudication work, which also requires 2 different parties to adjudicate each ballot. So you had to have at least 2 of the 3 parties to do that. So that's what the county employees were doing at the end. They brought them on just to help the backlog.
Well, that's what I was thinking, Mr. Chairman, because I was thinking we should have called in more of the party workers then to come in and help rather than do that. But that's
Well,
fine. You clarified it for me.
We didn't call anybody in. That's, I think, the joy of this hearing. Every single one of these individuals is stepped forward of their own volition. And I to be honest with you, I'm mortified to hear what's coming out of your mouth, but I am so delighted that you have had the courage to come in here.
Yes.
Very few people.
Okay, we have more witnesses to get to.
Representative Roberts, just keep in mind, we still have got a dozen witnesses to hear,
Oh my
and
gosh.
it's 3:30, so.
Sorry,
We're going to be here
I
till
just
midnight,
wanted to revisit,
our time.
what you were saying as far as, you got to a point where they continued to say that they didn't know where these trucks
The
of ballots were
panel
coming from.
of senators here have way
It's
more
not that they
questions
didn't
than they
know,
did in
it's that they didn't know how
Pennsylvania.
many were still coming.
Okay. I assume at this point in time, these were
feel like
not
the panel
early
here
ballots in any
is-
way, shape, or form. I'm just kind of curious, while we've been discussing this, did anything stand out to you as far as these new ballots that they didn't know where they were coming from? As far as a physical appearance in any way?
I think they're also in a different, they're just a different mindset of people. They're more analytical.
I don't think that they
just kept coming.
I feel like they kind of came at this a little bit more argumentatively. Like, I don't really think there's a lot here in our state, but I'm Republican and I want it to be so, but I just don't think it's...
Thank you, Mr.
You know
Chairman. Ma'am, just one real quick question. I'm sorry I was out. I don't know if it was addressed yet.
They're just so analytical. Everybody's got a question.
During the adjudication process where they were on the duplications, you said you were there observing. Was there a Republican and a Democrat sitting there literally making the corrections?
Yes. So one was running the mouse on the computer. One was running the computer mouse. And the other one was logging anything they changed by hand. So, and then at the end of their shift, I will tell you that this process, of all the things I saw, was probably the cleanest. So at the end of their shift, they got a report of everything they changed on the computer, and they had to go through their hand log, and they had to both agree that everything they did was what they said they were going to do.
Okay, great, thank you.
Robin says 1 in 8 ballot rejection is a terrible record. Back when I was an observer in a rural county in 1990, we never got near that rate of rejection, even when with our old clunky electromechanical counter. Man, guys, I'll sit here. I'm gonna be here. I have to pee. I'm going to. I'm just saying I don't want to miss anything.
Greg, I'm very sorry for butchering your name, man.
I kept wanting to go to the witnesses.
If you would, could you properly pronounce it? Give us just 10 seconds of what you plan to tell us, and if you could keep it within 10 minutes.
The guys told you how it could be done. These guys were showing what they saw, and it's up to you to put it together.
I want to apologize for saying pee. That offends some people. I have to use the ladies' room. I'm going to go right now, but don't let me miss anything.
We have a little bit about what I observed as a certified poll observer, election observer down at the Maricopa County MTech facility, the tabulation center as it's referred to. I'm going to refer to some of my notes, but in short, what I'd like to talk about is comments that were made to me by a Dominion employee around chain of custody and what I would discuss or describe as the ability of fluidity or porous administration on the system. As I mentioned, I was an observer at MTech on 10/24, and then again a week later on Sunday, 11/1, before Election Day. I spent approximately 8 or 9 hours on site at the MTech facility. I obviously had the paperwork to be there, was badged, and I had the ability to move about the MTech tabulation room. I was in the area where they were doing adjudication work, and then later on the Sunday the 11th, Sunday the 1st, they were also doing ballot feeding and tabulation. What I observed in there was the Dominion computer system in what's described as a caged glassed area. There were several Canon scanners in there, as well as what I'd call 2 rather large bulk ballot processing machines, which are essentially OCR, optical code recognition scanners. I interacted with several supervisors. I will not mention their names here today, most of which are just by first name basis, and that was either inside or outside that room. What's most important is I had an opportunity to speak to a gentleman whose name I will not mention here, by all I know is his first name, but he identified himself as a Dominion employee on contract to Maricopa County for the election, and I observed him and another Dominion employee who I would say was in the capacity, as they described to me, as systems administration roles, and they demonstrated competence and knowledge around systems, access to the system, as well as the administration of that system. They were there to help the workers, as well as the volunteer poll, not the volunteer, but paid poll workers, to do the adjudication process, as well as any issues that may have occurred with the tabulation machines. What I observed was that the machines were optically reading the mail-in ballots, converting the paper ballots into an electronic image, and discerning the voter tabulation data into an electronic format. So think of that as an image, like a JPEG, a picture, as well as some sort of tally or calculation. I don't have intimate knowledge of the inside workings of the system. And then I also spent a day on November 5th in the signature room, but I will not discuss any of that today, but for the record. So on Sunday, November 1st, in the adjudication tabulation scanning room, and in witness with other observer, who is here to testify today as well, as my witness, I spoke to this gentleman from Dominion and asked questions on the computer systems contained in the room and contained within that caged area connected to the ballot scanners, the OCR readers. It was my understanding from staff as well as the employees that we were processing mail-in ballots, obviously, and that those tabulations were being fed into the computer system within that room, and there was an assurity that there seemed to be a level of physical as well as network security based on the arrangement of those computer systems. On that day, I asked the gentleman how the tabulation data and scanned images were being stored and backed up. It's common practice in computer system IT administration to do regular disk backups or system backups in the event that some sort of failure occurs to that system. The gentleman stated that he would perform a manual daily backup of the system to an external hard drive attached to and within the secured computer bay glass cage as I described. The hard drive was in a rubberized orange case and easily visible. He pointed to it and identified it. I asked what software program he was using to perform the backups. He stated he was not using an automated backup, but inferred that he was doing a simple manual copy of data to this orange disk, as I'm referring to it here in my statement. Then he said he took and made a second copy of that backup, of that orange backup, and then he reached over to his cubicle area and demonstrated a new box of hard drives that were contained in there, and he was saying that he was making a second copy of that data onto one of those fresh hard drives. That then led me to ask him a common question, which was, is there a chain of custody, and where does that drive go? He was a little bit vague in his answer, but he said that there was not a chain of custody, and that the copy that he was making daily of the master backup was being taken off-site to another facility, and he was unclear to me how it was, but when I asked him if it was getting serialized or in any way secured, he could not confirm that and basically said there was no chain of custody. I found that alarming.
That's really alarming.
It's just a free-for-all. These Dominion employees can do whatever they want.
Sunday,
and you know what?
I then again the same
if there
gentleman
were plausible explanations for this, we
having
don't have them because Dominion has fallen off the face of the earth.
And I was able to walk about the room somewhat, and I came upon their conversation. And
that's because
I overheard what he was talking about was, it sounded like he was trying to resolve a problem within the system that perhaps was slowing down the way the system was performing, considering that about 12% of the ballots that were being read at that point were going to what's called adjudication. So we're talking about tens of thousands of ballots a day.
Tens and thousands of ballots a day going to the adjudication.
They were very concerned about getting those ballots processed in a timely fashion.
Because in the adjudication, they can give them all for a certain candidate.
So what he described to me was that he was
only
having
Dominion
to take
workers were operating it.
some of the scanned data.
The adjudication had the
that's right.
But at the end, they just had
data file,
employees,
so to speak, on the Dominion system with its storage.
and they were cheering for Biden.
And break that larger file into small files so that he could then point those smaller files to the adjudication stations, so for more efficient processing.
Manually put in by somebody else.
That sounded like a manual and complex tasks to be taking something that's ever growing, and I asked him, I said, that sounds like a bit of work. At any rate, what I discerned from that conversation was that by doing so, he was able to get some of that processing moving a little bit quicker, and it sounded like they were obviously trying to deal with the situation at hand. But what concerned me about that, and again, I'm only observing, was that it showed to me the fluidity and the porous nature of the access that the administrator had to tabulated ballot data. And that there was the possibility of that human intervention in the process creating a potential or non-intentional error or the potential for lost data or lost files. And that's what I observed on that day. When I left the facility later that day, I obviously reported some of my concerns, and then, of course, I'm here today to let you know what I saw.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Giuliani, do you have a question? Or two?
Sir, so what, can you help us a bit in what does that all lead you to, at least hypothetically?
I love that this hearing isn't official because he wouldn't be allowed to really, I think, have these people draw all these hypotheticals.
We've been hearing from election officials and others that...
Could you get just a little closer?
Yeah, we've been hearing from election officials and others about the sanctity and the security of this system. We've been hearing things about networks and data coming and going. And one of the most, I guess, basic premises of any kind of security would be physical security. Mm-hmm. And by having that disk drive copied and then shuffled off the premises, presumably, by this gentleman's statement, without a chain of custody, that's no different than ballots in a box, read or unread, coming and going without any supervision.
So this Dominion employee,
I mean, don't worry, you can trust us.
Right.
Could have taken him anywhere.
Give us
and could have done anything with him that he wanted.
Passwords.
There's the potential for that, or have given it to another individual to courier it to whatever facility they were allegedly storing it at. So he was vague on those details. Perhaps he didn't know, but his job was to make that copy.
So why is there a chain of custody?
I would imagine there's a chain of custody so that we can prove that the data has not changed and it arrived at its intended destination unhandled and manhandled or any kind of malicious activity performed on it.
And this was a Dominion employee who did this?
That's correct.
And did any of the county officials try to stop him, try to interfere with him?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, he openly talked about what he had to do when I asked him the question on the backups. So I would presume
if Dominion had answers for this, they would be.
A function that he
you would be all over this. Like,
sure
no.
There was some
this is what we do. This is where we go. This is where these things go. You'd have monsters of like CEO lawyer. This is shady stuff.
Process.
Dude, like the tobacco industry has better lawyers.
Did he indicate
you know what I'm saying?
He was taking them with him, either home or somewhere else, to do something with them? Was there a purpose to it?
I did not hear him make any mention of that. My concern was where did it go, and he inferred that he thought it might be going to another facility uptown.
He thought it might be?
Yes.
He didn't know where it was going to go?
Well, that's his words. I don't know if he actually knew. I can't read his thoughts, but my point is that his answers seemed a little bit vague and perhaps honest, but nonetheless.
His name was Bruce?
Yes.
You don't know his second name?
I don't.
His second name.
How old is he?
I would say he was probably in his mid-40s at the oldest, about 200 pounds, 5'8", 5'9".
And
look for Bruce. Somebody look up Bruce in the system.
He said he was bringing them uptown?
He said that the copy of the backup drive was being taken off-site, which is not an uncommon practice to have an on-site and an off-site backup copy. But when I asked him how it was getting there, how it was being transported,
right.
It was being secured, and where it was landing, with some assurity that it got there, he said there was no chain of custody.
What's concerning about that is, honestly,
where he was taking it,
even if it wasn't nefarious, they probably just didn't care. Like, it's just votes. Yes, my dude can put it in his car and take it where it needs to go. It's just votes.
Probably was intending
like they don't care.
Secured safely in the event that it was needed for some.
They're not going to handle it like it's a briefcase of
money.
How
often did this occur? One time?
He told me that he was doing this daily.
So every night he would take out the drive with him?
He would make a copy to the main, what he called the orange drive in the cage in the security area, and then make a
I don't trust
second
these
copy
people.
for this offset.
Well, I don't
copy,
trust that they
which
aren't
would
here
then
to answer for
allegedly
themselves.
move out
I
of the
know.
Intech facility
Then they have
to
not been. They
some
had the
unknown
opportunity to
destination.
speak to
And when you
Pennsylvania,
objected
and they backed
to
out.
what happened?
And then their businesses shut
I
down.
guess
They
I really
shut
didn't
down
overreact.
Toronto. Where are they
I was
located?
there
We
as an
know nothing
observer,
about these
and
people.
I guess it wasn't my
This isn't
question,
like a major
I didn't
company.
feel it was my position
Like,
to get confrontational.
you know, Johnson
about
and
it,
Johnson being
and I
sued
just
over
quietly
talcum
made my
powder or
observations and
something.
duly
They
noted
bring their
them to the
lawyers to
proper
the
authorities.
game. They're being
Is there anything else
accused
you
of
noted about
treason.
the facility?
I would say that, you know,
They're just trying to run out the clock.
I've seen some publications around
we did it for the Democrats. We just got to get to there.
county's,
They're all in hiding, little Serbians.
installation of the facility and the idea that it provides a level of transparency to the community. It's visible if you have access to the building, the server's visible. My concerns, though, would be that I can't say with, you know, because I just don't know whether or not, by just looking at that facility and looking at the way the servers were secured, whether or not anyone else had particular access. I mean, there were many workers in that area, including the Dominion administrators. There was, you know, at any given time, 15, maybe even more than 20 people working on adjudication in there, as well as the staff from the county. So
When they were taking the
Can we just get on to the next
copy,
one? This
making
is
the
like
copy,
this is
did
why I
they
couldn't
do
be a
any,
lawyer.
data
Okay,
checks
I gotta move
before,
on. Moving on.
removing the drives?
But it is really
So they
important.
could compare?
All these details are important. It's just for us. We
Compare
want
it
the
when it came back.
PowerPoints. Give me your PowerPoint. Yeah, I mean it's a hearing.
My question to the
People
employee
report on
in his
hearings
answer
later.
didn't include any speculation around that.
Did you see that happen?
No, I did not.
Call me KT on Twitter says murder
Members,
cases
any
have been
questions?
thrown out over improper
Representative
chain
Roberts.
of custody. Oh, bingo.
Mr. Chairman, sir, you mentioned earlier that you said that you reported your concerns after this all took place. Who exactly did you report your concerns to?
The Observer program, I was told to go online and make a report. And then later on, when I was reached by the coordinator for that, they asked me if I would make a declaration, which is why I'm here today.
Do you know if this information as far as the lack of chain of custody, because I understand that from your explanation, this orange hard drive would be like essentially the entire electorate's votes that's kept in there. To your knowledge, was this ever, the report of lack of chain of custody ever given to the Attorney General's Election Integrity Unit?
Not to my knowledge and not through me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Members, any other questions?
No.
Thank you
moving
very
on.
much, sir. We appreciate your time.
Tough crowd. I'm a tough crowd. Come on, PowerPoints.
Next up, we have Les Minkus, the poll observer, and Diane Sarah is on deck.
Oh, look at this. He just trying to do what's right. Looks like Roger Stone. I thought the same thing. You said it. I was like, here comes Roger Stone.
Oh man.
Good afternoon, Mr. Minkus. If you would, could you please give your full
in the
name?
leather pants is like able to breathe because those
Go
are
right
not
ahead and
breathable
your
pants.
testimony,
Don't
please.
breathe.
But she's holding her own, dude. She's
My name
holding
is
her
Les
own.
Minkus,
They're
and
vinyl.
as a veteran poll watcher and observer of the 2016, 2018, and 2020 elections,
got
I'm here
some
to
experience.
testify to what I encountered in the 2020 election as voting irregularities, inequities, lack of transparency, and contested
So
voter
he
results.
can make a comparison.
I'm also here as a veteran, a military veteran, and wish to
on.
extend my sincere appreciation to all of our military men and women that serve to keep the United States of America a free constitutional republic, a nation of constitutional laws, checks and balances. And I'd salute our flag.
Oh my God. So people coming
And to all of
forward,
our
man, it's in their
military
blood,
branches,
baby.
I say, Semper Fi. Always faithful.
I love him so much.
My professional bio
He's trying to
includes
show you that
50
he's
plus
legit.
years
His
in
name's
corporate
Les?
life as Vice President of Finance,
I think he's
CFO, Legal Liaison Officer for worldwide companies and joint venture operations, where I traveled to 28 countries over 13 years, responsible for financial operations, mergers and acquisitions, audits that were both general audits and forensic audits,
Forget my yawning.
banking, tax, and legal relationships with barristers, solicitors, and attorneys internationally. Following is my declaration, as well as a copy of my poll observer authorization form, which I brought with me to show you that I was legally responsible as a poll worker.
I love him.
That I was required to present to poll inspectors at each of the poll locations where I was assigned to observe. Also, I have a picture of the Bar Elementary School gymnasium that was a polling location where I served on November the 3rd. The picture is to demonstrate the enormous size of the facility for only one Republican poll observer to watch the voting activity from an assigned seat at the entrance of the gym and not be able to see any of the ballots or the actual processing that was located at the opposite end of the gym.
Okay, that's where he was
Everybody
at.
knows
That's
what
where
a
the
cool
shenanigans
gym
went
looks
down,
like,
baby.
But I thought I'd bring a picture just to make certain that you got it.
I love him already.
I served as an official legal observer for the 2020 general election at two different locations. On October 27th, October 29th, I was at the United Methodist Church in Sun Lakes, Arizona. On November 3rd, from 5:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. at the Bar Elementary School in Phoenix, and then from 4 o'clock to 7:15 at the Sun Lakes Methodist Church in Sun Lakes, Arizona.
Hang on.
While serving
You
as an
worked for, like,
observer,
all
I
day.
personally witnessed the following. Observers were not allowed to talk with poll workers or voters, which was part of the manual that the Secretary of State had put out, which was clear. Nor was I able to freely walk around the poll location to observe any of the voting activities, which was contrary to what was in the Secretary of State's manual, indicating that we should be allowed to have access to all areas of the voting to be able to observe them. At the Sun Lakes location, I was seated about 25 feet away from the tabulating machine and the ballot box, the ballot drop box, and I had to ask the poll inspector and had to be accompanied by a poll worker if I wanted to walk around to observe anything anywhere in the polling locations. In the Bar Elementary School, I was seated about 80 feet from the two tabulator machines and the ballot drop box, and I had to ask the poll inspector, who was at the opposite end of the gymnasium, and I only saw her maybe twice during the time I was there, from 5:30 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. If I wanted to walk around and I had to be accompanied by a poll worker to observe anything anywhere in the poll location.
What's the point of him being
It
there?
appeared to me that almost every ballot, from what I was able to see, that was processed through the tabulator computer resulted in a green light switch being activated, and either the poll worker or the voter had to depress that green light switch for their ballot to process through the tabulator. Okay, so
Every
I
ballot?
also
we know
was
about that green light now.
On October 16th, I was also an observer that I went to the Maricopa County Election Center. That was the week after the early voting had started. And I asked to observe the ballot opening. I was asked to observe the ballot opening, sorting, and processing in the center.
The lady on her phone is getting on my
regarding
nerves. Do you know how
lack
many
of
people want to be in this room
transparency,
right now? Get off the
at
phone,
this
mask
facility
lady.
includes observers were told how the ballot receiving process was supposed to function, but was not shown or allowed to see the mail receiving room operations. The methods used to support the supporting of the various types of ballots, how the various types of ballots were opened and distributed to processors, what the processors did with the various types of ballots, and the security of knowing that all valid ballots reached the tabulating room so that each legal vote was actually counted. While I was an observer there at the facility, where the ballots were received, validated, processed, in the large room that was there that I was seated in, I was about 25 feet away from the closest table where there was supposed to be a Republican and a Democrat sitting at the table, but who knew? I mean, nobody knew who was actually at the table because you couldn't see any credentials for anybody there. The room was large enough to hold 110 ballot processors, and the closest one that I was near was 25 feet away, so I wasn't able to really see much of anything. I was not allowed to talk to or ask any questions of anyone other than the assistant director of the facility, which I saw maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the entire day that I was there, from 9 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. There was a young agent in the facility talking with the assistant manager at the same time that I was out in the corridor that I briefly met and asked him what his role was, and he replied that he was a computer programmer at the facility. Well, I didn't think much about it until afterwards when I heard the news and I heard about the allegations that China was heavily involved with the ballot tabulating company and the software. I started to think about, gee, that's really unusual that we had an Asian gentleman that was there that was in the programming process. So I just thought it was kind of unusual, and I mentioned it in my affidavit that I had put in. Okay, finally, following the election, I was asked to come to the Arizona GOP office in order to be able to investigate some of the complaints that were coming in from voters. And I spoke with around 35 Republican voters that complained about their ballot issues of processing through the tabulating machine that they personally experienced on election day. Then they signed declarations under penalty of perjury that I actually went out, saw them and talked to them and asked them if they would be willing to sign those affidavits, that they had to push the green button on the tabulation machine since the poll worker told them to do so, but didn't tell them that the machine rejected their ballot and what options they had to correct their ballots by having the ballot spoiled and redoing it again. So they just thought that pushing the green button was required to process their ballot through the tabulation machine.
When that was supposed to be
extremely
extremely
rare. A sign of voting
rare.
irregularity and voter inequity.
Wow.
Thank you. That concludes my testimony today.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Minkus,
Minkus. Less
when you were at
Minkus.
the center, you noticed this green button. Can you explain to us what the green button is and
Green
was it on
button's
every
trending
machine?
on Twitter right now. I guarantee it.
It wasn't at the center that I observed the
Leah
green
would
button.
normally be all over
It was
Twitter
while
during
I
this.
was a poll observer.
But when you were a poll watcher at the voting location.
At the poll
Okay, well,
location.
explain to me the green
Where's
button.
your phone?
The green button is a button that's labeled cast.
Cast, C-A-S-T?
C-A-S-T. It is a triangular shaped button.
Oh,
And
now
there
we
is
know.
another button that's on the machine right next to it, which I believe is a rectangular shaped button. That
Rectangular shaped
was a
button.
button that was
Okay, it's
used
not a
for
rectangular shape.
other issues, but it wasn't for casting the ballot. If they wanted to reject the ballot, they pushed the rectangular button and they would reject the ballot. So, as I understand it, the reason that the green light would show up is because the machine wasn't accepting the ballot.
Which confirms
There
what
was
the
some
other
issue
lady
with the
said.
ballot. Now, whether there was a smudge,
Her
whether
guy.
there was an improper marks in place, whether it was an overvote, an undervote, or whatever it may have been, it had rejected the ballot. But I had observed from the distance that I was at that so many times that green button, that green triangular button had to be pushed, that it seemed to me like it was almost a requirement that they had to do that in order to be able to put a ballot through.
It was like boom, boom, boom.
And in fact, what happened when you pressed the green button?
Well, the green button did accept the ballot. It pushed it through, but it put the ballot then into a drawer which they noted as drawer number 3, which separated that from the ballots that were accepted, which went into drawer number 1 and number 2.
Drawer number 3.
So all those ballots that went in number 3, I don't know what happened to them.
Were they put aside for further inspection?
I don't know. Because these ballots then were all taken. This was on election
Drawer
day.
number 3.
That, this became
I bet that's going to
issue.
trend.
And all these
on
ballots
Twitter.
then were, at the end of the day, taken out of the machines. They were put into box or boxes.
Special boxes just for them? For number 3?
I don't know if the drawer number 3 went into a special box. Because I
did.
wasn't able to observe that.
I see.
And get close enough to
And
see
he
that.
should have been able to
But I
observe
know that
it.
the ballots then were all supposed to be taken to another location where it was a central location in the East Valley in Arizona, where they were going to be picked up by a white panel truck. And again, I did not follow that because the inspector, who was a Republican,
green buttons
indicated
went into
that she
drawer
was
number
going
3.
along with it and she was going to follow it. But I do understand that during the time that I served as a poll inspector in the early election
That's why it took
period,
so long in
that there were,
Maricopa County, because they were
times during
spooling
the
the
day,
ballots
usually it was like about 2 o'clock
in
the
Arizona
afternoon,
with the
where
Sharpies.
Yeah.
And then they could
truck would
adjudicate
come,
them.
a
And they were
van-
doing that in a
van
lot
truck,
of
panel
Republican
truck, would come to the
precincts.
poll location.
So they could go and
There were
adjudicate
2
and steal your
representatives
vote
that would come in
from
that
Trump
had,
to Biden.
Name tags on them. They would then take the ballots, and I happened to follow that out. They would take the ballots, put it into a box, a plastic box, and they would take them out to their truck. Well, in one case, I followed them out just to see what was going on, and I noticed that the truck that they had a California plate on it, so I thought that was kind of unusual, and I questioned about that, but I understand that they were renting trucks locally, so they could have been that there were enough people moving from California that were using those trucks that were here that wound up.
Are you referring now just to the ballots that were the subject of the green button that went into number 3?
These were just
all the ballots.
These were all the ballots. They were ballots coming out of the ballot box and ballots that were coming from out of the machines.
And the green ballots were taken along with them?
Yes.
Okay.
They're calling the green ballots.
You also said that, well, how many ballots approximately do you think were cast that way, that you observed?
Well, in each day, when I was there prior to the actual election day, there were probably several hundreds to thousands of people that filed through that particular.
How many?
Several hundreds to a thousand people that filed through that particular polling location.
Right.
Yeah. On election day, there was probably over 1,000 people that came through there.
So total of about
A couple thousand.
2,000-3,000 people?
Yes.
And when you were at the Maricopa County election facility, where the ballots were received, validated, and processed, you were seated 25 feet in front of a room with 110 ballot processors. Could you see anything?
No. I mean, I could see the people. I could
No,
see
but
the
could
room.
you observe signatures or
Not at all.
envelopes?
They
or
would not allow us to go beyond. I was sitting in a seat, and there was a pathway that was in front of me where they would actually bring the carts in that had the ballots in them in mail containers, and they would just go through that long aisleway and set them off on the side. Other than that, I was not able to talk to anybody. I was not able to see anything. I was not able to examine anything. So as a poll observer, I was really hindered by just being there and not being able to talk to anybody or see anything.
And what were they physically doing with the ballots?
Well, they were sitting at the tables. Again, there were 110 of them, so they were spread.
110 tables?
Yes.
And how many observers?
And I would say the room was probably as large as this room.
How many observers, Republican observers?
Well, I was the only.
You were the
I was the only poll
Republican
observer on the Republican side. While
So
it was
110?
110
Tables.
processors.
110 tables?
No, 110 processors. On two of the tables, so there were probably about 55 tables.
55 tables, 110 processes.
And I was the only Republican observer.
And you have only 2 eyes, right?
Unless
you
I'm
weren't
wearing my-
selected
unless I'm wearing
because
my
you have
glasses.
more than 2 eyes.
Unless I'm wearing my glasses.
Well, then you have 4, okay. So, I mean, you couldn't see anything.
No, could not see anything.
They could have been putting phony ballots in and you wouldn't have known the difference.
Absolutely, it could have been.
Right? They could have been stuffing the ballot box.
Yes.
You're supposed to be there in order to make us comfortable
Yes.
that didn't happen.
Yes, sir.
This
Because
should
mail
concern
in balloting is
every
prone to that kind of fraud.
honest American.
That's exactly right.
It should
So they
delight
completely
every
frustrated you
dishonest American.
in your mission to do that. How many ballots? Now you have 55 tables, got 110 employees. We got one Republican, Mr. Minkus. You must have felt a little uncomfortable as the one Republican. Did you have your MAGA hat on?
Yes, and as I had asked the assistant manager there a couple of questions as she came in and out 2 or 3 times throughout the entire day, I had asked her how many ballots they were actually processing. She said that they had about
You know what, enough to catch up?
2.8 million ballots that they were expecting to process during that election period. I think it was a 14-day period. And there would be about a little over 100,000 ballots a day that were going through there.
So those people were calculating,
They were
tabulating, checking out about
They were
100,000.
moving very quickly.
Approximately 100,000 ballots.
They were moving very quickly. to
Without
get
any
over.
observation by Mr. Minkus, who was the only Republican there.
Exactly.
And did you raise an issue about that?
No, I didn't, because I didn't know whether anything that was going on there was proper or not proper. I was only there for 1 day, and I was just observing to see what questions I did want to ask, of which I asked a few questions, as well as that I realized that I was not able to actually see the process coming where the trucks come in, unload the ballots, see what was going on in the mailroom, how they process through the ballots.
It was just 1 day of that, 1 day?
I was there for 1 day.
And about 100,000 votes a day.
Yes, correct.
And then you mentioned that 35 people signed under penalty of perjury. Something about the green,
Yes.
the use of the green button. Would you explain that one more time so I get it right?
Yes. After the election was over with, the Arizona GOP had received many, many calls and complaints from voters about the fact that they felt that when they checked
Don't
their
worry.
ballot hadn't been
We
counted.
adjucated
so they were
it.
wondering what happened to it.
I'm sure
So
we
they wanted
did it
to know
right.
how they could check to see if their ballots were actually counted or what happened to them. As a result of that, the Arizona GOP had asked for volunteers to come in to make calls back to these people, these voters, to find all over the valley, to find out what the issues were that they had encountered. What I had uncovered that I just testified to was that many of these people that I talked to, there were at least 35 of them, for which I actually went out and picked up their affidavits. So I was able to talk to them not only the phone, but talk to them person to person, that they had told me that the experience they had was that they brought their ballot up to the machine, they put it into the machine, the poll worker that was there, when the green light went on, the poll worker that was there told them to push the green button.
Wow.
And they did, and the machine accepted their ballot, but yet it wasn't counted.
Which that poll worker probably was just told by the Dominion people or whatever. Just tell people to press the green button. It'll go through. It's fine.
Probably in the Republican counties.
Is that you, Mr. Roberts? Mr. Cook? Mr. Cook, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is to clear something up for us here from your testimony, sir. Okay, I don't know if anybody else noticed, but there were 3 drawers, and I'm confused. What do we need 3 drawers for? If so, my question is, the 2 drawers that were there, how were those ballots separated and why? Were votes for the presidential candidates, were they separated by that? For 2 drawers, was they separated for
Why were there 3
the
drawers?
county
Should be
supervisor
2.
races?
Good,
Why was
bad,
there a
right?
need for 2 drawers if the ballot went through the machine, everything was good? Why 2 drawers? Do you know the answer to that?
No, I don't. But if you go on to the Secretary of State's website and take off the 2020 general election manual, it tells you in there how those machines were set up, and it explains to you what those 3 drawers were.
Okay, thank you. Next question I have was that, did you witness in any of your, and thank you for your work, by the way, did you witness anything like the testimony we have heard today where the lowering of standards on the site for signature verifications for any mail-in ballots, were those standards lowered at that site by any individual?
I did not observe that, so my answer to that would be I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
These people are answering honestly. They're not, if they,
Mr. Chairman.
I've not seen
Mr.
anybody
Minkus,
jump on a question.
Well, just to tack on to what Representative Cook was just asking, you stated earlier that you were not allowed to see the receiving process of those ballots. Does that include the signature verification? Is that what you were referring to earlier?
I wasn't allowed to see any part of the receiving process where the trucks would come to the building, they would be unloaded, they would go into the mail receiving room. The mail receiving room should have been able to separate the ballots by whatever method they would use to separate them. They were then supposed to go through a slicing machine. And these were things that I was told, but we were not actually able to see them.
No, when you, if I may continue, when you say that you were told, because you also said something earlier that you were not allowed, you participated in 2016, 2018, right, and now 2020, and that some things changed from 16 and 18. I assume there's always going to be some minor changes here and there, but you said that you're not allowed to talk to them and you're not allowed to walk around the polling place, which was contrary to the policy set forth by the Secretary of State. So were you given any reason as to why you were being told on the day of implementation of these policies, why you were not allowed to do what was set forth in those policies as far as seeing the receiving process, as far as, you know, you're there obviously to observe. Were you given any, you said that you were prevented. How were you prevented? What did they say to you? And did they give you a reason as to why you couldn't do that?
The inspector at each of the polling locations, after I would come in and I would show them my official credentials, they would then give me instructions, and this went on in both locations that I served at, where the inspector would tell us that here's the seat where you can sit, and you can't walk around and talk to any of the poll workers or any of the voters, and if you do want to go any place in the facility, in the polling location, that you have to ask me first, and I will assign a poll worker to you for you to be able to walk around with. Now, that's contrary to the observer's information that was on the 2020 general election manual that was put out by the Secretary of State, which said, if an observer arrives at the voting location, the inspector should, number one, welcome the observer and thank them for their service. Number two, instruct them that they can observe operations but must maintain at least a 6 foot of physical distance from voters. Number three, work with the observer to find a few optimal locations in the vote center, that allow for observation without impeding the flow of operations. That's it. But I was told by the inspectors at each location that I must ask them for permission, and they must have a poll worker walk around with me.
Where do you feel like would be a good place for you to observe?
No.
You're a poll observer.
Poll observer, watcher observer is separate from poll worker.
Okay, one last question, Mr. Chairman. So from 2016 to 2018 to 2020, again, you stated there was changes. Was there anything else that stood out in 2020 as far as the changes from your experience from the prior two election cycles, as far as new rules and things? And
an unfriendly environment.
okay, thank you.
I wonder why it was unfriendly.
Mr. Menkes, could forgive me, but I'd like to expand on that a little bit. Unfriendly compared to previous years?
Yes.
And unfriendly, how so?
As a Republican poll worker, which I had a badge that I had to wear that said that I was a Republican poll observer, I felt intimidated by if I was walking anywhere in the facility, even to go to the bathroom, some of the poll workers would they'd kind of be intimidating. They'd be if I made a nice gesture or comment to them, I wouldn't get any kind of return back to that extent. You know, if you're having a good day, something of that nature. It was a rather intimidating, unfriendly environment.
So a failure to be cordial.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Senator Burley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Menkes, now, were you a volunteer or were you getting paid for that?
No, I was strictly volunteer.
So you did that completely out of patriotism and no pay, and yeah, no good deed goes unpunished, right? Now, did the Democrat poll, the other folks, your counterpart, did they have a badge also?
Selfish motive for doing what I did, and it is to save this country.
Yes, sir. Now your counterpart, did they also have a badge that identified Democrat?
Some of them did, some of them didn't, so it wasn't consistent.
But you were...
They all had to come in with an identification. The Republicans were one color, the Democrats were another color. When I was at the election facility there for the short period of time that a Democrat was there, which they came in like about 2 in the afternoon, we stayed till from 2 to like 4 in the afternoon. There was a Democrat there. She was sitting right next to me. The extent of the conversation I had with her started and ended with the fact that the Democratic office in Phoenix was destroyed sometime during the year by one of their workers. And I didn't know anything about it, frankly, but she went on and talking about it like that was the only thing that we ever got a chance to talk about. So, yeah, it was an environment that was not, I didn't really feel warm as a volunteer to actually feel like I was being accepted and being welcome to be doing what I was doing.
One more question. You're a veteran, sir?
Am I a military veteran?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. What era?
I was in during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service, sir. And I beyond your military service.
I'm sorry?
Beyond your military service, sir.
Yes,
it's
sir.
people like you that make this country work. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love Republicans so much. Like, I'm not.
All right, our next witness, and I know I'm very sorry that we have, it's been such a long day and we've had a number of witnesses that have had to go to work and have had to leave. So if I'm going to give you a couple minutes, if I call your name and you're not here, we'll go on to the next person, but we're going to try and work through this entire name list. The next individual up is Diane Sarah. Is Diane still here? All right, she'll be on her way. Oh, she's on Zoom. Well, let's see if we can find Diane Sarah on Zoom.
I appreciate that they're taking their time. They're not rushing this.
I am not seeing Diane Sarah on Zoom.
It could be boring to some people, but...
So if somebody wants to reach out to her, or maybe they know her, if she would like to try and get back on, that'd be great.
They don't normally broadcast these. Well, they broadcast
Judith
a lot of stuff
Burns.
Barry was asking, so Gonzalez was asking, what happens now that the vote has been certified? And I was saying,
Judith?
It's not that big of a deal.
All right,
We're
great.
looking at when the electoral votes are actually cast.
Yeah, if not,
which
you're
is
now.
the biggest deal.
All right.
Audits can be done after certification.
Oh,
If you would please give your name, and if I'm just going to ask you to please be succinct about your experience as a poll worker. So please give your name and let's go.
I'm Dr. Judith Burns. I'm
She's
a
a
resident
doctor.
of Maricopa County. And I've been a public educator for 40 years at both the university and secondary levels of education.
These people are all like top quality.
I was an observer at the Tabulation and Election Center on 2 occasions and a poll watcher in my community on 1 day.
They find really high quality people.
Initially, I chose to do this as a civic duty to my state and to my country. And I believed in the process. Excuse me. I'm nervous because this is so very, very important.
Ma'am, please don't be nervous. It's just us normal people that you're talking to.
The whole state legislature. No, just kidding.
If you're a teacher, we're nervous.
I won't check your grammar.
Thank you.
I observed at the election center on 2 occasions, both in the signature verification room and in the ballot processing room. The first day I was in the signature verification room, I was a little bit, having never done this before, I was a little bit startled at the circumstances. I walked in, was set at a table, told to stay in that spot, and I was facing a room full of computers that all I could see was the back of them.
And by the way,
there were some computers behind me,
anything
but no
going
screeners
untoward in
there
Arizona.
that day. There were maybe 8 or 9 people.
This is so much stuff. We all kind of
present
thought,
that
well,
day.
why are you going to Arizona?
I couldn't see
Michigan's
anything,
going to be off the
and
chain,
I was
but
very
the fact that there
disturbed
still
by
is
this,
stuff
but
going
wasn't
on.
really sure what to do.
We did know.
I did
Because
ask
Arizona,
Celia,
like,
who I
why
believe is
is
one of the
Arizona
vice
taking
presidents
so
of
long?
operations,
Throwing people's
why
ballots
they
out
were
and
like
having to
that,
recheck
and I
them.
was told because they needed to be set up that way due to the wiring systems. So I was there again 4 days later, and the room was full of screeners. I was able to turn my chair around and look through a plexiglass at one of the computer screens, which was maybe 6 feet from me. I could see it better when I was able to stand up, which I did. I kept looking at the screen because it seemed very odd. And in the bottom right-hand corner was a yellow banner. And I got into a position where I could see the yellow banner, which said low confidence. Then I started paying much closer attention to the signatures, thinking this didn't even make sense to me because the signature on the ballot that was being compared to other signatures didn't even resemble in any way what they were comparing it to.
Bingo.
They were completely illegible. They were just scribbles on the ballot. And there were 5 screeners screening low confidence ballots for an entire afternoon that I was in there. And I asked Celia what the low confidence said, and she said just not to worry about that. That this was a new program that they were testing.
Sure it was.
And I said, okay. So I continued watching, and shortly after I talked with her, I had a few other questions, and at that time she suggested that I just sit down at the table where we were in our little area that we were supposed to remain. Shortly after that, there was a server outage. And I believe on my affidavit, I said there was a power outage. But in actuality, the lights were still on. It was just the servers in that room that went out for maybe 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm sitting there thinking, where did all those signatures go that were in the queue for them to check? That was one of my questions. Then, when the computers came back up, the gentleman that I could see quite well all of a sudden had a green banner and it said high confidence. And I just sat there very quietly watching, because then they had some conversations. There were 5 screeners all in one small area. They had some conversation, and the question from one of them to this gentleman was, are you still doing what we were doing, meaning low confidence? And he said, no, I'm doing high confidence now. And he was, out of those 5 screeners, he was then the only one that was doing high confidence signatures, because he was the one I could see. And at least that's what I surmised. I don't know if it was coincidental that there was an outage. And I don't really know what all that means, but what was evident to me was
the power goes
signatures
out
that were going through there,
and the
were
one screen
not
she can see
what
gets
they were
switched from
trying
low
to compare
confidence to high confidence.
And so that was my concern that particular day. Let's see. The other experience was in the...
I would try to wing this thing. You have to have notes.
I did ask Celia what happened to those votes. Were they counted? And I may have already said this, I don't think I did, but she said, yes, they were counted. And I gave her a puzzled look, because it all seemed very odd to me, and I wasn't sure what to make of the fact that there were all these signatures that did not match, and then I was being told they were being counted. The other area that I was in was in the ballot processing room.
Come on,
this
is one woman.
Probably a little smaller than this. There had to have been 75 to 90 tables in
now.
There were 2 processors on each side of different parties. I was told. Again, I was probably as far away as that black curtain, and the room was this big. We couldn't see anything or really observe anything.
But you could.
There did seem to be a process for getting new ballots
rolls.
for them to take out of the envelopes and separate.
And then that
the
would just
ballot
give you an
and the
idea.
envelope. But what I
You don't know
noticed
who they
that
voted for.
raised some questions for me was they had their purses at their table. They had their cell phones there. During their break time, if they did not get up and leave their table, they were able to rummage in their purses and in their backpacks. People had backpacks there as well. And this bothered me. I wasn't really sure if this was appropriate.
This is
That's the signature thing is the biggest thing. That's
but
the
the
mail-in
fact that they were
ballot.
able to have
I found
purses and cell
interesting in
phones
the whole
and stuff.
process was when
Right, but the fact. This is a
the
fact.
press came in the second day
Did
that
all
I was
those
there.
votes count? Yes,
The
they
2
counted.
women that had been in a quality assurance role, is what I was told, that sat at tables, and I think if they had overvotes or undervotes on a ballot or an issue with a ballot, they would take to those women. All of a sudden, they were sitting at a table like this, one on each side, and they were processing the ballots very close to me. They weren't very far. They had set up a table very close to where I was as an observer, and the press was able to take pictures of us so that they could see that there were observers close to them, and they would get behind me, and they were directed that I was an observer. So they were trying to get pictures, including me in that, was the impression that I was given by the conversation I was hearing.
So it was a setup.
The other experience I had was in my community at in the early voting. I got there very early, wanted to make sure I knew where I was supposed to be seated and what I was going to be able to see. And I was placed again against the wall, out of the way, so that I couldn't see anything. And when I got up to walk, keeping distance from people, and there was quite a bit of an area, it was in a gymnasium, so it was a large voting area. I wanted to see the process of when a person would put their driver's license in and then get their ballot printed out at the other end, go to their voting booth, and then turn in. I just wanted to walk the process to see what was going on. I was told to go sit down and to stay up against the wall, actually, quite a ways removed. Well, as it happened, where I was sitting was where people would come to turn in their ballots and put them in the slot. Well, many people did not want to take their masks off and lick their envelopes. And so they couldn't, they were trying water and a sponge and a rag. Well, the wetter the envelopes got, they would not stick. So they started putting masking tape on the envelope. And I guess it's the teacher in me, forgive me, but I did say to the supervisor, I'm not sure this is appropriate. I'm not sure these ballots will be counted, and I'm concerned. And I did call the number on the back of my badge that I was given.
You ever opened an envelope with tape on it and then reclosed it?
The number that,
I'm not saying
and
I've done
recorded
that
that
before,
this was going on.
but
This went on all day long.
Not hard.
In this precinct. There was masking tape, there was tape. Somebody had gone to get a dauber to try to get the envelopes to stick. But when I would watch people put them in, the envelope would open and so I don't know if those ballots fell out, if those ballots were ever counted. I'm not really sure what it meant. But what I
dumbest election
from
ever.
all of this was that there were just some odd things going on, and I was concerned. I was concerned both at the tabulation center by the fact that we weren't allowed to see signatures, that I was looking at low confidence signatures and was told that those votes would be counted, and then going to a precinct and seeing that envelopes were being taped with masking tape for an entire day. And I was very concerned about that. When I volunteered to serve as an observer, I did so with
audacious, but just curious, like, what are they going to bring out of Arizona? I'm not hearing a whole lot out of Arizona. Arizona, with these 9 hours of testimonies,
They showed everything.
showed
we needed.
far more than Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And Pennsylvania had far more to give.
Mhm.
Imagine what it's, and then the next one is Michigan.
So if you thought, I've always known this, okay? So Michigan is going to explode like the 4th of July.
That's good.
It is going to be off the charts. You won't want to miss it.
When are they doing it?
I thought it was tomorrow, but they didn't say anything about tomorrow. But so I'm not sure.
If it's tomorrow, I gotta go to bed now.
Heads are gonna roll, okay, in Michigan, like you have never seen, because those Michigan witnesses are fit to be tied. And I hope they actually start with the Michigan witnesses. And honestly, I'm just like, forget your expert witnesses, just get to the witnesses, because you have to do that. All right, we got to get going. This was a great parody about Sidney Powell that somebody put together. So, can I see the words? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, turn it down a little bit. I'm trying my mouse. No, because they can't hear.
Okay.
He was looking for votes to steal. He was in a bind, mighty way behind. He was willing to make a deal. When he came upon the Texas lawyer, boy, this gal was hot. The devil jumped down from a hickory stump and said, girl, let me tell you what. I bet you didn't know it, but I'm a legal evil too. And if you care to take a dare, I'd make a bet with you. Now you run a pretty good case, old gal, but give the devil his due. I've been 12 more years to get your soul, and I think I'm better than you. The gal said, my name's Sidney, and though it might be sin, I'll take that bet you're gonna regret, 'cause I'm the best that's ever been. You keep sharpening up your cases, it's like we are.
You'll have to read these words, guys. If you're just listening, it's not gonna mean much.
Now when you win, we get back all those votes to move your soul. But if you lose, the beat they keep control.
I'm kind of just hoping we don't get a copyright strike for this. That would be bad.
Well, it's not copyright, and plus
it's a parody, right? So if this is allowed on YouTube, then we're allowed to put it on YouTube,
right?
Right?
And a band of demons joined right in, and it sounded just like this. your mouth and sit down while I show you how it's done. Stop on the mountain, run,
Look
run,
at it!
run.
I love that picture!
Jump to the house when the counting's done.
I'm printing that off and putting it in my room.
That room, kick it out, folks. Not allowing drunk folks, no child, no.
Sydney Powell Wonder Woman kills me. That's my favorite. That's just my favorite.
The devil bowed his head because he knew that he'd been beat. He just tucked his tail and ran away, ashamed and in defeat. Sydney said, now don't come back if you know what's good for you. Cause if you do, I'll have to turn my kraken loose on you. Fire on the mountain, run, boys, run. Devil kicked out where the counting's done.
So good.
Auditors back now, check those folks. Don't count names, no child, no.
Jennifer on Facebook says, I love this song. I wish Charlie was still alive. He would love this. He would. He would love this. Taken too early. Definitely taken too early. So I hope you guys enjoyed that as a treat. Leah played that for Kansas and I last night, and I lost my mind. It was just the best thing ever. So, I think that's an excellent way to round off the
lift
day.
this election up to you and all that it entails. So much corruption, Father God, but it's been there and it's been lurking for so long. We just thank you that you've brought it all to the surface and that so many Christians are waking up. I pray that you wake us all up that need to be woken up, and I pray that you show us exactly what we can do, how we can pray. I just pray these hearings go well. The Michigan one is just blows things up in a good way. I just pray that the world sees this and knows that this is a sham election and Biden concedes and they all give up because they know that they lost and they cheated and they put their tail between their legs. And we curse and we bind Satan. You do not have America. You do not have the Declaration. You do not have the Constitution. We plead the blood of Jesus over each and every one of these people listening to us right now, around all these state legislators. I pray that you open doors that no man can shut and that you shut the doors that the devil has tried to keep open. We curse and bind the devil from the Supreme Court, and we just pray, Father God, that this all works out to your glory, and we just put it into your hands. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. All right. So we'll be back here tomorrow, regardless of, I'll find out whether it's Michigan tomorrow or whenever it is. I thought I remember them saying that one was on the 5th. Like way back when they were lining these up. I don't know. So we'll have to get back with you guys on that. But thank you for staying with us all day long. Been streaming the second stream for 6 hours and 37 minutes. 38 now. So we're definitely go take some time off. Thank you for being
Tomorrow's
here with
hearing.
us. It's really tomorrow.
Yeah.
What time?
Beginning at 10:15 Eastern time. Oh gosh. RSBN says currently en route to Michigan for tomorrow's hearing.
How is Rudy gonna get any sleep?
Featuring testimony.
Michigan and Arizona aren't close
regarding absentee ballot counting in Detroit.
Oh my gosh. Maybe that airplane was there, and maybe that airplane had brought Rudy and stuff. Probably not.
Oh, so wait, this is a different kind of hearing. The GOP chairman of Michigan Oversight Committee will not allow President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, to testify at the hearing. He is not allowed to testify at the Michigan hearing. It's just...
Just what?
The witnesses.
Well, okay. So tomorrow's going to be probably a little bit different kind of atmosphere. If that's the case, if it's not the same kind of... So this is more of an official capacity? I wonder why. So, but what about like Jenna Ellis? Like Trump's team can't be there at all?
I don't know.
Then where are the witnesses coming from? I thought that the whole point of these hearings was for Trump's team to be able to present the overwhelming evidence that they have.
I don't...
In each one of these states and stuff. So that's really interesting. All right, well, we'll see. We'll bring it to you, whatever it is. We love you guys. God loves you. God bless. Remember, it's not just a conspiracy theory. If it's the truth, like this video, comment on this video, share it everywhere. A lot of people need this information. I know it was long. You can just tell people that. I know this is long. Play it anyway on maybe like 1.25 time. Cut it down a little bit. Okay, God bless. Be excited. I think we took huge ground today. humongous ground today. And we'll continue to bring you the latest right here from Resistance Chicks. Good night, guys.
Yeah.
God bless.
I was called